All right, good afternoon, everyone. I will be calling the Design Review Committee meeting to order. It is September 8th, 2022. It is a special meeting. As we have a full house today, there's a couple of items I'd like to take care of before we call the meeting to order, go any further in the agenda. The first of which is just an explanation of how public hearings are held. For those items that are public hearings, there are 4 of them today. The order is the applicant will have the ability to present their application. Then there will be a staff report, and then it will be opened up to the public for public testimony. We do ask that the public stay to 3 minutes in their public testimony. You will also need to state your name and address. If you're here in person, make sure that you've signed up, please, for the corresponding application, and then come up to the podium and speak directly into the microphone in particular, so those that are on Zoom can hear you. And again, state your name and address. For those of you who are on Zoom, if your full first and last name are not on Zoom, please make sure to have them, or before you testify, to let us know the spelling of your name and your full name. Often members of the public will ask questions because of the format of a public hearing. The applicant will be taking notes and will be able to respond to your questions in the rebuttal that comes after the public testimony portion. And the commission can also ask staff clarifying questions. We do ask that you stay within the order and only provide testimony or comments during your turn at when you do provide the testimony within those 3 minutes. And with that, I can note for the record that both appointed members are present on Zoom. Planning official Thornborrow is here, as well as City Associate Planner Hanna Veal. And are there any changes to the agenda?
None by staff.
None by staff. It looks like no changes to the agenda. The next item is the consent agenda, which consists of the August 16th, 2022 minutes.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. And then we'll move on to our first public hearing, which is subdivision fiscal year 2022, number 2, Honcik Townhomes subdivision located at 3900 North Reed Street. And I will turn it over to Mr. Hatch for his presentation.
Good afternoon, Hatch with Hatch Design Architecture. Our address is 200 West 36th Street in the wonderful town of Garden City. Good afternoon, Design Review Commissioners, City staff. Thank you for your consideration of our design review hearing this afternoon. The brief recap of the location. We were just kind of northwest of Peregrine Park, right along the river. From some of the last feedback we had at our public hearings, we have gone ahead and revised some of the amenity in our common space. We've also defined additional distinction to the proposed pathway between the structures, adding planters and vegetation to soften that walk and approach. Well, here's an enlarged location of that, those planters and opportunities to engage the general public. So just highlighting that location, a couple considerations for the purpose and the function of achieving and addressing it. If we look at an aerial of this location in particular, where the proposed sidewalk currently is, for that to continue and convey towards the park, we have a fire hydrant, a large transformer, a detector box, some IT meterings, a power pole. And so we'd effectively be going through this location to try to connect them to that sidewalk. If we look slightly south, we have a location currently shown where we have our bike storage, and at this location as well as over here.
Mr. Hatch,
Yeah.
it sounds like you may believe that you're sharing your screen. I just wanted to let you know that you're not. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I apologize for that inconvenience, and
I was seeing it all in my head, Jeff. I saw it all.
I appreciate that there. So I'll briefly recap, since you've already heard me kind of describe where I'm at so far. So the location was shown on the vicinity map, which just to confirm, you can all see that now.
We can, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So we have disorientation next to public park. We have the river frontage. And so looking at our revised landscaping plan, we have enhanced this walkway, adding planters and buffers along that way to help encourage pedestrian activity towards that space, as well as enhancing some of the amenities at this location, our common area. So you can see that slightly enlarged here. In that location, what I was just recapping was, we actually look at connectivity to the existing sidewalk of the park. That location is interrupted by a range of different utilities, from electrical to emergency services and other meters, a power pole. So to be able to connect that sidewalk, there are some very valid reasons why the city didn't put in that public sidewalk at that location. So if we look at, okay, well, how are we going to connect this sidewalk into the park? If we go a little bit further south, where we have our public bike parking here, and we have some bike parking here, we still have some additional meters over there. So then we're actually pushed even further into the site, which really led us to think, you know, if we're having to engage the site halfway through the site anyway, in order to engage people with the park, the owner felt that it was prudent to adjust the site layout, and so that we're accentuating that, centralizing it to the center of the development, and creating a focused, intentional access to Greenbelt, and also for the general public to enjoy that parkway. So looking at some of the enhancements that we've done to that to help encourage and engage that, we've added a pedestrian access signage with an entry arbor, who calls attention and engages individuals into understanding that, yes, this is a public access, this is intentional, this is the way to go. You don't need to go walk through the sector meter box tree forest with all the utilities to try to get to the sidewalk. We've engaged and made this much more functional, purposeful access to Greenbelt. And then with that, we've added a little bit of our artistic intention of directing people to go that way again, to try to engage and make it intentionally inviting for people to clearly be able to get there from a standpoint. So here's a screenshot looking through, seeing that space, walking through to the green belt. And then, based on the staff report, we just wanted to speak to a couple of different comments and considerations of the staff report. There was a comment about units greater than 30 feet in height needing aerial apparatus. And in talking with the fire department, we did widen our walkway to the 26 feet that's needed for the aerial apparatus. In talking to them, we would also be proposing fire suppression, which also alleviates some of their concerns. There's a consideration of some of the curb widths needing to be reduced in size, and the annotation for the final plat. We're fine with that condition of approval. Here's just kind of our follow-up with the fire department and them acknowledging that they're okay with suppression in that. So this is a reiteration from our previous coordination. There are some considerations for the preliminary plat as far as labeling and also dimensional tolerances, which we would be fine in agreement with those conditions of approval. And then indication of the bike parking, which I previously spoke to, is the keynote. Some of the vegetation needs to be clarified, which is now in these renderings. There was a site deficiency in enclosed parking, which has now been revised since we had no carports on the site at this time. There were some questions as far as our tabulation for landscaping. And so from our most recent design review plans, the intent would be to have some class 1 trees, but the landscape architect does feel that they are comfortable and can revise that to be 3 class 2 trees as requested by staff. They would just need to clarify with staff the species that they would want for those locations. So we would request that that be a coordination condition of approval. We are in agreement that we can achieve that request. And then there was a request for tree remediation for an arborist, as we have recently done even on our multi-family project off State Street. Having an arborist do that is something we're fine with. We can provide staff that letter, so we would request that as a condition of approval as well. As far as the open space, there's a question about how that coordination is taking place, and coordination with the intent of really maintaining the connectivity to development and activating the pedestrian to the Greenbelt and to Peregrine Park as discussed, versus trying to lead them through a whole meter bank of utilities. Fencing to remain in protection, that's mostly to our western property line for our adjacent neighbor. And from our feedback, that was something that was maintained. And if staff's okay with the existing fencing on our southerly parking adjacent to the parking lot, we would keep that mostly for that separation between the private use and that public parking lot. So if we need to have any kind of easement location for the Greenbelt access, we're in agreement and feel that we can coordinate that with the city and the surveyor. As far as our 10% space, talking with our landscape architect who provided us with this response, ownership and architects coordinate with the surveyor to just distinctly define and quantify those percentages, but we feel that we can do that. We've had to do that in the past with staff, so we request that as condition of approval. ACHD had some maximum widths for their access points, which are reflected, and we would just clarify that with our final plat. And then with that, as far as their permanent easement, we would also be able to satisfy that with our surveyor. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hatch? All right, seeing none, I'll turn it over to Ms. Veal for a staff report.
Good afternoon. This is subdivision fiscal year 2022-0002 Honcik subdivision. The discussion or the most recent discussion with the design review committee was on June 20th, 2022. And the most recent resubmittal packet was received on August 8th, 2022. The packet addresses some of the design reviews committee's concerns and comments from previous hearings dating all the way back to February of 2022. This staff report associated with today's hearing reflects the most recent changes to plans submitted in August. Highlighted in bold sections in the staff report reflect the most recent analysis and staff's comments. So I will defer to the staff analysis for any questions that the public or the committee might have. Any changes to the site and landscape plans as mentioned today by the applicant in order to meet code would need to go through another thorough code review analysis and possibly another public hearing. Otherwise, there are a lot of conditions conditioned in that staff report or the associated decision document to require code compliance, but they are pretty generalized conditions. Some of the major code compliance issues that staff has concerns with regard the first being the common open space. There was not enough information provided to staff to thoroughly analyze the common open space and at least the details of that common open space. Although it was pretty clear as to what was going to be the common open space area, the square footage was not included in the packet. It has been conditioned to require code compliant common open space, including square footage counts. This is a concern, or at least having the condition is a concern of staff's, because despite it being conditioned in that decision document, if the current proposed plans are approved and the common open space is not adequate as shown, redesigning the whole development might have to happen and occur. And if it's a significant enough change, then the entire application would have to go back through the public hearing process. So really narrowing down what that square footage count is and if it is code compliant is very important. Staff also has concerns regarding the structural design and the standards that it's meeting. The new site plans show pedestrian pathways from the public sidewalk to the primary entrances of the residential dwelling units. They are shown on site plans, or the pedestrian pathway is shown on the site plans as stamped concrete that resemble pavers through the drive aisle. The most recent resubmittal packet also lacked updated schematic drawings of the guest parking and dwelling unit, that shared unit there along Reed Street. So staff wasn't able to review for further compliance, and based off of previous comments and discussions, that whole guest unit and parking unit was not code compliant. Additionally, staff does not believe that the dwelling units of the entire development adequately address North Reed Street, nor do they create a dynamic relationship between the front-facing facades and the public realm of Reed Street. For reference, Garden City Code 84C speaks to pedestrian level design and how to adequately address the public realm by having a frontage zone. And this frontage zone is measured from the property line and is between the minimum setback per the base zoning district standards and the maximum setback of 20 feet. So by proposing such a large setback between the road, the sidewalk, the common drive, and the front door of these buildings, there is essentially too much space in order to have that active and dynamic frontage space. Landscaping is also another concern. In March, the submittal packet included a mitigation plan, but it didn't include an arborist letter. The site does propose to remove all existing trees, including those that are closest to the green belt, but still remain on site as removal of trees off-site is not permitted. This goes against subdivision findings, or at least the removal of all existing trees goes against subdivision findings and goals of the comprehensive plan, because both speak to preserving the natural, scenic, and historic resources of a development site when at all possible, especially when considering the property's proximity to the greenbelt area. The rest of the development, specifically in the area between the greenbelt and the proposed homes, have two different tree types, both of which are columnar in character. Staff might suggest having larger trees, perhaps even class 2 or 3 trees could be planted in this location, and include the retention of the existing healthy elm trees so that the greenbelt is protected, and we help create that green landscape that everyone likes to have along the green belt. So there's an issue regarding the lots in the common drive. The proposed subdivision does not dedicate a common lot for the common drive or the common area located at the front of the property. While this is not completely unheard of to have individual lots contain subdivision common areas, we would just require there to be an easement across those lots where the common open spaces are. But staff does prefer, at least for the common drive area, to be on its own lot for maintenance standards and reasons. There's at least a need for discussion regarding the parking. There's that guest dwelling unit / parking structure located to the, I'll call it the west side of the property. And staff has questions regarding how the legalities of that structure is to function. The structure shows that there's going to be 3 guest parking spaces within the structure with garage doors. And as these spaces are supposed to be guest parking spaces, staff has questions as to how guests will know that those are for them to utilize, as well as it being on, I'll call it dwelling 1's lot or lot 1. Is it going to be maintained by the HOA because it's on lot 1? Is that owner of lot 1 going to be the one responsible for the guest parking and that guest unit that is above the guest parking spaces? That needs to be hashed out and discussed as far as legal concerns go. And with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Veal. Any questions for staff?
Not right now.
Thank you. We do not have anybody signed up for this application in person. Is there anybody that wishes to testify on this matter? Is there anybody on Zoom that wishes to testify on this matter? If you do not know how to use the raise your hand feature, you can go ahead and speak up. All right. Then we will close the public testimony and turn it back over to Mr. Hatch for rebuttal.
Thank you. I'll just touch on a couple comments from Hanna. Hanna, thank you for that recap. As far as the request for easement for the roadway, I think since we're at a preliminary plat right now, that ownership would be fine with that being a condition of approval. With that, the guest unit would be owned and maintained by the HOA, but to clarify that, if we're having to make a common lot for the roadway itself, I would say as part of that condition of approval, we could make that guest unit also part of that same easement, so that we could just clean up that common area request. As far as the use of the guest parking for the units, each of the units would have associated control through the HOA. And talking with the ownership team, everyone would have access to those guest parking based on the limited availability of parking in that area. That access would be secured, but everyone in the townhomes would have access to that. So similar to the reservation that will be used for the actual guest dwelling, the guest parking would also be associated with that. So if you have reservation for the guest dwelling, you would be able to also have reservation for parking associated with that. And so that is something that ownership feels comfortable with managing, especially because the developer is also going to live on site. So he's aware of that complexity and feels that the CCNRs and HOA can manage that. As far as some of the interpretations and that aren't entirely following code, we also do have a planned unit development application associated with this subdivision, which kind of indicates some of the waivers and alternative compliance methods that we've presented, discussed, and hope to accomplish. And with that, I will stand for any additional questions from commission.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hatch? I guess I might have a couple to make sure that we've addressed what came up in Ms. Veal's staff report. Might you be able to share the screen and show the differences of where the public easement is intended and where the private easement is intended?
As far as when you say private, are you talking about the townhomes themselves, or are you talking about that roadway easement? I'm not totally following your question, Jenna.
In looking at the response, the resubmittal response, it looked to me that there's an intended private easement, greenbelt easement for the residents. However, it's also noted that connection piece between the units is intended for public access. And so I'm just curious about the difference.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. So each of the individual townhomes will be subdivided, and as a townhome, they're going to have their own property boundaries. In order to access that public easement, we will need an access easement between those private residences in order to be able to access that public right of way. And so how that works from their individual locations to that would have to be clarified.
Okay, thank you. And have you spoken with the adjacent property to verify that connection to the greenbelt could be granted?
As far as this location,
Yes.
at least our initial discussions with that entity were, after you have something finalized for approval, we can determine exactly how that looks for that access point. So it was favorable, but as far as a formal agreement, we wanted to make sure that we all had general approved buy-in for this proposed solution. And then as a condition of approval, we would request that we formalize that. It's a great comment.
Thank you. And then it's been brought up the purposes of the plan unit development. And I was hoping that you might be able to articulate how this application is meeting the purpose of the plan unit development for the waivers that are being requested. I can help out if you need the code section, or I can generalize it. The purpose very generally states that the plan unit development is utilized to increase living choices, to preserve open space, to preserve items of note such as trees, vistas, etc., and to be in harmony with the comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Jenna. So as far as the PUD application goes, we feel that this project accomplishes the ideals of that. We feel that one of the main things that this application does with these townhomes that is a little unique, but also we found has been favorable from a city council standpoint in the past with some of our other approvals for plan unit developments, is a mix of types of units. So we have some that are, you know, a range of different sizes, but with that we also have some that are more of kind of a 2-bedroom smaller footprint versus, you know, your 3 with an office. And it seemed like most of the feedback we were getting from city council was, you know, having these opportunities for larger units was something they hadn't seen with a lot of the other plan unit developments coming through as of late. And so that has been really well received. And that was something that we wanted to continue gaining that feedback and being active about. As far as open space, I mean, we're literally opening the middle of our development in order to celebrate the open space and natural connectivity with that green belt. And so I think the limitation of our roadway towards the Reed Street versus having kind of a larger centralized access that would really put asphalt in the roadway centered to the river frontage. In this particular case, activates and celebrates that with the pedestrian connectivity versus celebrating the vehicle. And so I think based on those, and then also the consideration of having that guest unit for that flexible housing for people who have visitors that come into the area, they want to be able to, you know, maybe they have a full house already with that townhome. They want to be able to have their family close to be able to celebrate and enjoy the river, and they can really achieve all of that with this dynamic. So we feel that that kind of recaps what that plan unit development is about.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Hatch? All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Hatch. I'll turn it over to the committee members for discussion.
I keep hoping this comes back without a U-shaped drive in the front, and it hasn't. From the pre-app to the many other times we've seen this, it still is car-centric, car-focused, you know, multifamily housing with a or pavement up front than almost there is living footprint. And I think that's been the biggest elephant in the room in this project all along. And we've asked for that to be changed and be addressed, and that hasn't been changed or addressed. So I don't, you know, once again, don't see this project moving forward with my recommendation with that. with that major element that hasn't changed. There's been things done to try to address that, but in every rendering except the one when you're standing in the pathway, it doesn't look like, oh, there's the green belt. Let me go down this really nice pedestrian path that's carved out between these buildings. It's 6 feet wide through a 3-story on each side canyon. And that doesn't, to me, feel like that we've all of a sudden forgotten that we've crossed basically a circular drive to get there. So I'm still struggling with that big picture element, and can't see it moving forward with that.
Yeah, I tend to feel the same way. I think I've struggled with this from the start of just the connectivity and the street front presence that these buildings have being pulled so far back, and giving more attention to their proximity to the greenbelt than their proximity to the street. And that narrow connection between those, again, the 3-story buildings, the narrow connection there to the greenbelt. I mean, I still feel that everything that was done there to try and draw attention to it, if I was in that area, I'd probably go through the park, get to the greenbelt. I wouldn't feel like that's a public connection, even though we're trying, there's a lot done there with the signage and colored walkway and the rest of that. It just still comes back to how far those are that you're traversing basically across the drive aisle to get to the front doors of those homes. And I really can't get past that either. I don't think it meets the intent of the code.
Yeah, that's the big, very obvious one. And then there was so many, other small things that Hanna very well summarized in her staff report, that this is wrong, it needs to be addressed. This is wrong, it needs to be addressed. This doesn't meet code, it needs to be addressed. And often we'll see things like that, and it can be conditioned and it works. But there was a lot of these things that I think that, were, if it had to change in a certain way, it needs to completely redesign something. And so it's a tricky one now too, because I'm struggling with, if we just deny it and then this goes to city council, all of those other little things that aren't right may just go along with an appeal, or if our denial gets overturned, there's all those little things that are just going to kind of go along with a potentially future approval. So I struggle with that, but I also struggle with, hey, come back to us again, because we've already said that 5 times and it hasn't changed. So I guess I don't know where to go with this, because I want to see it redesigned and I want to see the things that we've been looking for since the pre-app actually get included in the plans, but we've been asking for that and it hasn't happened. So I don't know, this may be where do we go from here, staff, or what are your thoughts, Brett?
I may jump in too. It sounds like there may be a recommendation for denial, but perhaps the draft potential decision document does not adequately incorporate the findings. And so there could be a possibility where the design review committee requests that the findings be redrafted to better identify the items that are found to be deficient within the staff report, and bring it back at the next meeting to make sure that it's adequately contained within the.
Brought back for review of those, of how that's crafted.
Yeah, because I guess I would agree with that. Unless we want to go through the draft decision item by item and make sure that that's the way we want it drafted or crafted at this point, and take the time in this meeting to do that.
Yeah.
Because the decision document is more, I guess, a little more generic, and I think the applicant deserves the specifics on the items that we're finding that this application is deficient in.
Yeah, I'd rather let Hannah have that fun at a later date, and then too, we can look at what, you know, because in a denial, the applicant's going to be looking for, well, what could I have done? You know, so we can study that a little bit more too, and have a more thorough response for that.
And I think it gives the specifics to city council on an appeal on exactly what the items were that did not get addressed, that we were focused on during these numerous hearings.
Yeah.
Does staff have enough information based on our past comments? Or do we need to go through any of that in order to get, I guess, some more specifics drafted?
And I think I'll jump in too, as you know, sorry.
I was going to ask, so that everybody can hear, if Ms. Veal feels that we have enough, should there be a continuance of this item to a date certain of the next scheduled meeting in 14 days? Or not 14 days, excuse me, on the 18th. And if she has enough information based on previous discussions that she feels that she could adequately address that, or if she would like prefer the commission detail that at this time. What I might note that if there is any new material that's discussed or introduced, we would need to reopen a hearing. So I would suggest, if this is the direction that the committee is going to leave the public hearing open into the next meeting. Ms. Veal, do you feel that you have enough, or would you like no, she does not. She would like some direction.
Well, I think, Hannah, when you were going through your staff report, much of that, you know, you went through your staff report, and then there was, you know, other further discussion. And I kind of wanted right after your staff report just to say, I recommend denial based on that, because all of those things were like, yeah, that's missing, that's missing, that's missing. So I think my interpretation is what you've written in the staff report, crafted in a way for denial, is what I'd be looking for, basically. I mean, it's all of those things. And the biggest one being the street front presence that we've talked about, and the, you know, car centric facade that we have of the building, and guest parking and common areas. And
Okay, thanks, Derek. I understand that. So essentially, all of the yellow highlighted portions that would require additional discussion because they're not code compliant.
Right, minus the fire stuff and things that are kind of other people's realms.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Do we have a motion?
Yes, I would move to continue this and leave the hearing open to the September, was it 18th,
19th.
19th?
And then in that meeting, just so that I'm prepared and Jeff's prepared, do we go through applicant report, staff report, public hearing, et cetera? It just opens up the same way again.
Or do we move right into review of the decision document? How does that need to happen, Jenna?
I suspect to keep it safe, that I would recommend that we just leave it completely open and request that only new information is addressed. And so if there is anything that is found to be new information, that be addressed and give the applicant the opportunity, and then open it up for public hearing and go through the process just to keep it very safe.
And then with that, then Jeff has the opportunity to prepare and submit new information as well, or are now we too close to that window of time to submit?
Well, it would be very difficult to submit timely and have it be reviewed by staff in time in a less than 2 week turnaround. And so if that were to occur, I would suspect that you may see an additional continuance.
And I just wanted to be clear and kind of speak it out so that the applicant was prepared more than anything. So I'll second that because I think Brett did make a motion to continue.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
And thank you, Mr. Hatch. And the next item on the agenda is design review fiscal year 2022, number 14. Kathy Sewell is requesting a new mixed use multifamily project located at 210 East 35th Street. And with that, I will give the floor to Ms. Sewell and team. Could I share my screen?
From your laptop?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. First time with that.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Bree Plat. This is my partner, Matthew Clark. And we're here with our architect and collaborator, Kathy Sewell. We want to thank you all for the opportunity to present our design for your review today. And thank the committee and staff for your time throughout this process. We believe we have a design that is ready for approval once we clarify a few important elements of the plan for our property. The Sonder is a mixed-use development within the C2 zone located at 210 East 35th Street between Carr and Clay. It's on a block in the heart of the Searle Mitchell Live Work Create District, across the street from WEPA and the new Soul project now under construction. We're also just 2 blocks from the future site of Casino Beach. Those projects, along with ours, are a big step towards realizing the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan that Garden City has created, as well as the Live Work Create District or the Old Town planning area. The mixed uses in our project include a single ground floor commercial retail space, extensive outdoor common areas, and 15 apartment units, 7 of which have accompanying workspaces at the courtyard level. It's also important for us to say at this point that Matthew and I are not outside developers just looking to maximize profits from this property for investors from afar, but this building will be our home. Our family of 4 plus a tiny, crazy, cute little dog will live in one of the 15 apartment units. And we plan to use one of the courtyard level workspaces as our home office and art studio. A little over a year ago, we identified and purchased this property for a few primary reasons. We're very aligned with the stated intentions of this neighborhood, including growth, density, diversity of housing, and artful placemaking. We really believe in the creativity and sense of community fostered by the Live Work Create district. There's also no limit on building height, no limit on density, and no objective parking standards for the mixed use projects. We saw this last item in particular as a selling point for our investment in the neighborhood and our commitment to making it our home. We know that our community is growing quickly, and included in that growth are some people looking for ways to reduce their reliance on cars and looking to live with neighbors that share that intention. Both Matthew and I have lived without cars in other cities for many years and very happily, and we're looking to create that possibility for ourselves and for others here at home. Garden and Boise City are working to revise their development code, including parking standards, to better accommodate healthy growth while also allowing for greater density. We understand that that's a tricky process, but there are a number of new tools and proven ideas available to us to address parking in a modern mixed-use development. So we've designed this mixed-use project to be fully compliant with Garden City Code and aligned with the comprehensive plan. We believe this fits beautifully within the larger stated vision of Garden City, a thriving, safe, and diverse community nestled by the river in the heart of the Treasure Valley. And we are at heart community-focused neighbors and advocates of vibrant, creative, artistic communities. We really admire Garden City's ability to continually innovate and reinvent itself, and we're excited to become part of this neighborhood.
Thanks. Again, I'm Matthew Clark. We want to say at this point that it's become clear to us from the staff report and the resulting public comments that we've not yet fully explained the parking plan developed for a mixed-use building. So we'd like to do that now. Most importantly, we want to clarify the parking space allotted to our car share program. There will be a shared vehicle on site. The staff report mentions ride share services like Lyft and Uber, which are certainly helpful in reducing the need for car ownership, particularly the Lyft program that makes connecting to bus stops much easier and more affordable. But our project will also feature an on-site car share service, an electric vehicle exclusively available for use by tenants of the building. This may be a new concept for Garden City, but it's been proven across the country as an innovative way to reduce car ownership. Reduced car ownership in turn results in reduced need for parking, but also results in a number of other additional benefits for the community. It reduces costs incurred directly by the tenants, including car payments, insurance, and maintenance, as well as construction costs for additional parking areas or structures. Those costs are typically passed through to tenants as an additional rent expense. Reduced costs means more income circulating through the local economy. Reduced car ownership and its requisite parking reduces environmental impacts, including through concrete, asphalt, and other contributors to the outsized carbon footprint of constructing parking spaces. And by redirecting trips from tenant-owned, typically gas-powered vehicles to a shared electric vehicle, the emissions reductions are substantial. So this plan also helps to improve community health and safety. Fewer cars means lower risk to pedestrians and cyclists. Less exhaust means cleaner air. Fewer combustion engines means a quieter community. On-site car share programs do work. Cities like Denver, Salt Lake City, and Portland have codified parking reductions, even for car share services that are not exclusive to residents, where you'd have a zip car that's parked there, but anyone can use it. Unlike this system where the car is actually dedicated to residents. A project in San Francisco has demonstrated that membership in an on-site car share program reduced car ownership to 0.24 vehicles per household. Our project will still have one off-street covered parking space for each apartment in the building, plus one off-street covered ADA accessible handicap parking spot, and one off-street covered parking spot dedicated to this car share vehicle. The project is compliant with the Garden City Code, including being sufficiently parked. To be clear, There's no objective standard for mixed-use development by which it's possible to determine a precise number of required parking spaces. The staff report applies the residential development standards to this project, but that section of the code clearly distinguishes between residential and mixed uses. The mixed use section specifically talks about minimum and maximum number of required off-street parking for non-residential uses, and mixed use shall be determined by the planning official based on the following criteria. So we're dealing with the specific proposed uses on the property. For us, that's 15 residential units, 7 of which are live workspaces with courtyard workspaces, 1 small pedestrian-oriented commercial retail space. Number 2 is uses in the vicinity of the property. Our mixed-use building is very much in line with the stated intentions for the area, but we're relatively early in the growth process in a neighborhood and the growth toward that goal. So the area currently is still predominantly residential. A traffic study, if prepared, we don't have a traffic study, but addressing number 4, we did do a parking survey, street parking survey that demonstrates plentiful available street parking. 65 to 85% of available street parking spaces were available as an average over 4 different times, including during a Saturday market where we actually collected data about street parking. Lastly, the availability of public transit, van pooling, or we think most importantly, other alternative transportation to serve the use. So in addition to the 17 covered parking spaces, the Sonder will be less than a quarter mile from a bus stop. We'll have at least 34 bike and scooter parking spaces, and we'll have this dedicated shared vehicle on site. We understand that actual mixed-use development is relatively new to the area and that the car share program hasn't been seen here yet. But the Sonder justifies its parking plan under these subjective guidelines, while also addressing the standards for alternatives to on-site parking, including transit stop proximity, incentives, and shower facilities. It's also worth mentioning that the staff report makes reference to a parking formula for commercial space that doesn't directly apply to mixed-use buildings, including live workspaces. But more importantly, we'd like to clarify that the workspaces at the courtyard level were designed for use by residents of the building, not people driving to the building, renting it just as their office from elsewhere. The live work create overlay clearly states that no off-street parking is required for working spaces less than 500 square feet in interior floor area. So knowing that the parking requirement was subjective, but that there was an established metric, we designed our project to meet the standard of workspaces under 500 feet.
So yeah, as Matt just said, we've designed our parking plan to provide sufficient parking for the specific uses of this mixed use project. At the same time, we know the subjectivity of certain sections of development code have caused a lot of confusion and concern and even litigation. And so if this committee or if staff find it relevant after hearing our presentation, we're very open to any comments that you all have about the legal status of the code, about the subjectivity of the parking requirements, about the objectivity of parking requirements required by local land use planning act. We're open to questions and comments and discussion there. There is one other clarification needed in response to the staff report. Let's see here. The report refers to design provisions for residential structures, specifically 8.4b.4b.2 regarding main entrances. So main entrances, which are the primary points of entry where the majority of building users will enter and leave, shall be designed as an obvious entrance and focal point of the building through architectural treatment, lighting, and address identification. So again, this project is a mixed-use building, not an exclusively residential structure. But for the sake of clarity, according to this definition, the small pedestrian-oriented retail space in our design is the main entrance. So we expect that even something like a coffee shop will see an average of more building users per day than the 15 apartments. So that said, in response to the comments we got from our pre-app meeting, we have designed the other 2 entrances, one for residents and one for occasional visitors to the courtyard level workspaces, to both be clear and inviting.
We would also like to say that we know that a few letters have been submitted in opposition to approval of our project. And we know that there are some folks here today to share some thoughts, and we're grateful that our neighbors are engaged and willing to express their opinions about growth in the neighborhood, truly. We also see that every one of those letters submitted focuses on parking, but none of them mention this car share program because it's not referenced in the staff report. And we hope that better understanding the way we intend to live in the neighborhood, including use of a shared vehicle, will help to allow different perspectives to share space in Garden City. We named this building the Sonder for a very specific reason. Sonder is defined as the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own. Bree and I are deliberately choosing to build our home in a way that allows us to share space and to interact with 14 other households in the building and hundreds more in the neighborhood. We hope that in that process, we all learn to better understand the variety of vivid and complex lives that exist in a community, many of which are different from our own. Lastly, we want to reaffirm that our project meets the findings required for the design review committee to approve our application. So to do that, I want to invite Kathy Sewell to join us as well, please.
Hello, Kathy Sewell with Platform Architecture and Design, 280 North 8, Suite 118 in Boise. First, I just want to thank Ms. Veal for all her help and assistance throughout the process. And I think in regard to the staff report and the proposed decision document, that the findings in fact for approval are right in line with what we had identified in our statement of intent compliance letter that was submitted with the package. For the sake of time, I will just say that we are support the findings. We agree with the findings. We also agree with the site-specific conditions of approval contained in the decision document. The only comments I would like to make in regard to finding 1 for approval, in there it states the proposed multifamily development. This is a mixed use development, so it'd be great to get that verbiage changed. And then in finding 2, which addresses the standards for the protection of health, safety, and general welfare. It's a small end, but we hope that our proposal just will not unreasonably diminish the health, safety, or welfare. We hope that it improves rather than unreasonably does not diminish it. But I think aside from that, we know the public's going to have some comments. Ms. Veal has a staff report, so we'll just wait for finish our comments during the discussion period. Unless there's some questions right now.
Any questions for the Sonder team?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Veal, I'll turn it over to you for your staff report.
Previous discussions with the design review committee included the design of the work and live spaces in relation to the public realm. The applicant has updated site plans to include additional design features and signage to help show that where the entryways are for both the courtyard and the residences. Staff has kept the Garden City Code analysis of 8.4b4, which the applicant did mention earlier. I've kept it highlighted to indicate that further discussion should be had or might be necessary just based off of the pre-application discussions. At least in regards to the design and orientation of the structure. I was able to, or I had interpreted this section of code with the understanding that the residential units are the primary use of the project, not that the commercial leasing space on the first floor, or even the courtyard spaces would act as the primary uses. And as such, I was able to interpret the 84B4 section of code as needing the primary entrances needing to at least before the residences and not through that commercial space. So that's why portions of that staff report analysis are highlighted and bolded in the staff analysis. But moving on to the main topic at hand, parking. So I wanted to point out, or I wanted to note a point of clarification that will contradict the staff report's discussion items, at least in regards to parking. So based off of legal counsel of the city's legal department, and an ongoing, or at least used to be a litigation application of a previous live work create application, the judge had determined that parking under the live work create overlay has to be true to code and not how staff has historically analyzed it and interpreted it. So instead of requiring one vehicular parking space for every 1,500 square feet of commercial space on site, or rather workspace, because we're working with the overlay. No, traditionally staff has taken all workspaces or commercial spaces and added them all up together for cumulative square footage, and then divided that by the 1,500 square feet to come out with a required parking count. But what the judge had determined is to go strictly off of what code says. So if the workspace is less than 500 square feet, then no commercial parking space would be required of that project. So in the case of this application, if they were to use the overlay, which they are not, I just want to clarify because there was some comparison going on. If this application were to have that overlay, they provided 3,505 square feet of commercial or workspace. But because all of those units, except for the commercial space, are under 500 square feet, really the application would only have to park for that commercial leasing space. The commercial leasing space on the first floor is 660 square feet. So that unit would only have to provide 2 parking spaces for all of the commercial or the work going on. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it was long-winded, but at the end of the day, in summary, it doesn't necessarily even apply. So you could ignore what I just said because the overlay district is not applicable to this application. So with that being said, the application has not chosen to use the live work create overlay, nor have they chosen to use the neighborhood commercial node overlay. So the parking standards that are applicable are the Garden City Code 84D parking standards. 84D goes into detail about how residential parking is required and how much residential parking is required, as well as guest. And then it gets vague and gray when it comes to commercial parking space requirements. In the case of this application, because it is straightforward, the residential parking requirements, including the guests, would be 11 residential parking spaces. With the commercial parking spaces, staff has traditionally used a comparison. So we go to other jurisdictions such as City of Boise, City of Meridian, and look at those parking standards. But what we oftentimes do is divide the provided commercial spaces with by 300 square feet, and that would require 1 parking space. So for every 300 square feet of commercial, there's 1 vehicular parking space required. Staff was able to apply this ratio, and the calculation ended up being 11 commercial parking spaces required. So In total, 22 parking spaces are required of this site, and there are only 17 parking spaces provided. So hashing it all out, it would be, the site is deficient 3 residential unit parking spaces, 8 guest parking spaces, and 11 commercial vehicular parking spaces. So to mitigate for the lack of parking, the applicant has provided ample enclosed and exposed bicycle parking spaces. They've provided 34 total, and that's only in communal areas. That's not to mention the possibility of having a resident use their dwelling unit as storage. They have also proposed a car share program for residents to use. The applicant has mentioned their proximity to the Greenbelt and the availability of ride share services such as Uber and Lyft, and discounted ride share services with Valley Regional Transit. Staff has conditioned to require a board or computer located in a public space that provides information including carpooling, transit trip planning assistance, transit maps, and maps of preferred bike routes. It has also been conditioned to require information regarding the Valley Regional Transit Lyft discount information for the duration of that service that VRT provides. The number of parking spaces proposed could be considered sufficient to serve the project because 1, the mixed use proposal will capture trips, and the small scale commercial is focused on serving the development's residents and other nearby walkable residents. 2, there is available street parking on the surrounding streets. 3, the project focuses on alternative modes of transportation through the ride share program and the surplus of bicycle and scooter parking. The project's proximity to the Greenbelt could ensure the success of non-vehicular transportation. 4, the new developments within the neighborhood will create a more walkable neighborhood once constructed. And 5, the 7 work units proposed are to be utilized by the residents of the Sonder, generating less vehicular trips than what was a standard commercial space would. However, the number of parking spaces proposed could not be considered sufficient to serve the project because 1, the mixed use proposal will generate additional vehicular trips to the project location, and the project does not supply enough on-site parking for its residents, guests, or customers. 2, there are many large-scale developments in the surrounding neighborhood that will also be utilizing the on-street parking. Thus, on-street parking will become more and more difficult to find. 3, there is not a public transit line or stop within close proximity to the project. And 4, the existing uses surrounding the project do not promote a walkable neighborhood. And lastly, I would like to clarify how staff did analyze the application because the application is not proposing to use the live work create overlay. Staff analyzed it as a mixed use multifamily development. The 7 work units on the courtyard level were analyzed in such a way that they would be considered commercial, despite them being utilized as the residents themselves. More so in the nature of the live work create overlay, having it be small businesses, not something large scale in nature, but something more than just a home occupancy would be occupying those spaces. So that is why the parking was calculated as it was. The findings within the decision document are stated as they were, as well as the rest of the staff comments were made the way they were. And with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Veal?
One quick question, Hannah, what was the crux of not using the overlay?
So it's my understanding that it was based off of height restrictions. And there were a few other factors involved, but primarily height.
Yep. Thanks for the reminder.
No questions for me.
I do just have a question to make sure that we have a complete record. Ms. Veal, do you recall meeting with the applicant prior to the formal application process and discussing code that may be applied, and would that extend to how the city has addressed parking?
Yes, I do recall having a due diligence or a pre-app or both with the applicant prior to the formal hearing process.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? All right, seeing none, we'll start the public hearing. And I have a number of people that are signed up to testify. If you haven't signed up to testify and wish to testify on this matter, please do so. And the first person I'll call is Kate Fulkenstein.
Hey, should I go ahead? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Kate Falkenstein. I own a house on 34th Street where my father-in-law lives. I'm concerned about the parking, as you might guess. I think this project won't stop people from owning cars. It will just take those cars and push them onto the street rather than on the development itself. I think it's telling, they're citing studies out of places like San Francisco, which is so much denser than this neighborhood. I can't imagine people living in this neighborhood and not needing a car, getting by with 1/15 of one shared vehicle. In order to do things like go to school or buy groceries, you need a car in this neighborhood. And so I think people will move into this and they will have cars. I think it's noteworthy that the parking requirements are pretty lax in the first place, assuming things like 1-bedroom apartments only having 1 car, which in many cases might not be true, and only 2 cars, even for apartments as big as 3 bedrooms. So these are fairly lax requirements. And even despite that, they're missing it by almost 50%. The main argument that they've raised is that they think there's enough street parking in the neighborhood based on having gone around and counted the number of cars on the streets right now within a 4-block radius, which is pretty wide, I would say, to get to your primary residence, but putting that aside. My main concern about that is that there's so much development happening in this neighborhood right now that the number of cars parked on the street during active construction isn't representative of what the neighborhood will be like and the parking will be in the future. I think the point of zoning regulations is to keep the area healthy in the long term, not just to count the cars that are parked right now. If we allow every development to point to an availability of street parking right now, then in the long run, that street parking will be taken up, but it'll be too late to solve the problem because there'll be no additional parking in these large developments, but no more parking available on the streets. I think the purpose of the street parking is for the people who don't live in the buildings, things like people who want to attend the coffee shop. If you've ever been to the area, like Push and Pour is 2 blocks away and has tons of people parking on the streets. So if they're thinking their commercial development might be something like a coffee shop, that's what the street parking is for. It's for people going to the farmer's market. It's for people going to the green belt. It's for guests visiting beyond the number of people who live in the building when they have like a party or all the things that happen in normal life. So I think it's important that the people who live in the building can park in the building. And that leaves the street parking for all those sorts of like overflow situations. And I think we need to act now to preserve equitable access to that street parking for future developments, not just allow one lot to take up all the street parking because they pointed out that it happens to be available right now. The only other thing I'd like to add is this idea that the offices are going to be used by residents. I read their application and I thought it was telling in their letter. They specifically say they're not directly connecting each workspace with a specific unit to quote, create more flexibility. Well, flexibility for what? Presumably for people who don't live in those residences to use those offices. If they're actually certain that the residences will be the people using the offices, they could commit to that. But the fact that they won't is telling, and I think means it's likely that at least some of those offices will drive people into the neighborhood to use the offices without living there, which in turn requires parking. At the end of the day, I think we need to preserve access to street parking for everyone and not allow them to take all of it. I'm in favor of development, but responsibly with the necessary parking. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Fulkenstein? It doesn't look like they have any. Thank you. Carrie Workus? Okay, thank you. Carl Workus.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to address this issue. My name is Carl Workus. I live at 3608 North Prospect Way in the waterfront district in Garden City. I also own the property at, myself and my wife own the property at 206 East 35th, which is the next door property, adjoining property. My wife and I came to the waterfront district at the beginning. We've been down here for a while. The waterfront district is kind of the launch of this concept of the density concept in Garden City. We have work live arrangements. It's and frankly, it's a nice place. It's gone quite well. I very much appreciate the applicant's efforts in this way. It's an interesting situation that they chose this site specifically because they could build a very tall structure here. I bought the place at 206 East 35th so that I can move to one level when I get too feeble to climb the 3 stories at my house. So my bucolic country home will now be a neighbor of it's not the sky, no, not a skyscraper, it's a tall building. So it just fundamentally changes the nature of the neighborhood, and I understand that's coming. I understand that that's planning, and just to note that when value is added in one aspect, we lose. We no longer have our village home. We're now in a high density area. I understand that's a process outside of this, but I don't get involved unless I'm personally, unless you push me into it. So here I am. I'm not going to talk about deck chairs. I don't care about the parking for today. I do want to mention that it just, I've run this by some friends who are developers. Everybody that I've shown it to has said the same thing. It's just too damn big. It's kind of like pornography. You know it when you see it, you don't know. And I don't know what the right size is. The concept is right. We lived in a no-car building. Ooh, I don't want to go over my time, so keep me. We lived in a no-car place for 2 years. But I got to tell you, transit that could take you anywhere was less than 100 steps away from the building. As a senior, 100 steps is too far, and that's a lot farther than any transit is in Garden City. So it's an issue for Garden City. Two more issues are issues for Garden City, but need to be considered. One, I'm going to put just on the record, constructability. I don't see how you could do this on this site. I've worked in construction. You can do it. It's expensive. And I guess one point that I really want to make today, and is completely outside of what anybody's talking about, but the staff report says floodplain not compliant. This development, my houses are in a floodplain. Garden City hasn't adopted for whatever reason. But if anybody watches the news and saw what happened to Red Lodge, Montana this year, that flood was not out of the ordinary that much. And even if you don't believe climate change, there's still that chance. Getting that density of people out of the way of a flood when it occurs is going to be, it'll be a mess, and somebody's going to be responsible for it. Likely I'll be gone by then. Thanks for your time. Any questions?
Thank you. Mr. Workus, any questions? No? Great. Thank you very much. Next, we have Louis Landry.
Thank you, Louis Landry. 211 East 33rd Street. I live 2 streets over and built down there 13 years ago. And you know, the neighborhood is changing. Some people think it's changed, absolutely going in the better direction. I had no problems when there were a lot of folks living in mobile homes, trailers, when there was Todd's Heating and Cooling, later to become Treasure Valley Granite down the street. That part of the neighborhood, I found fine. So now it's a different change, the issue of density. So I want to just hit at one thing. And, you know, in terms of this dialogue about design review, I was back in the early days when we'd sit around a table and talk. Those days are long gone. This is very much more approaching a legal process. And when it goes from here, if it's appealed or whatever to city council for review, we're really in a legal process. And on some of these, we've been to the Supreme Court and had rulings, as we heard a little bit about today. So the applicant mentioned that there's no height restrictions, no density requirements, no objective parking requirements in some of the city code here. So right now there's, I think it's a 6-story building. How many? Five stories. Could they withdraw it and put up 8, 10, or on the river, 18, 16? I mean, there are no restrictions for that lot size. Could it be accommodated? Carl's point is it even buildable? But at this point, I look at that lot size and I think the massiveness, this is somewhat staggering. Now, maybe I have to get my eyes used to it, but I've heard issues of this design review committee arguing over this kind of facade or that kind of facade and massing here or there. And that seems like picayune compared to setting up something like this and saying, the sky is the limit in Garden City. Or are there any limits in Garden City? Now, I was here at a number of meetings around the Strawberry Glen subdivision, right next door over here. And the issue was for the neighbors, what the impact is of going up next to the neighbors. And there were extensive discussions about that. Whether or not any of that learning that went on comes to play here, it's as if we have a drop of memory. We don't remember what we've done before, and there seems to be no applicability to what goes forward. So I'm very confused, because when I look at some of the staff review and it talks about the setbacks, I can hardly grasp what you're saying. So I have a couple of, so that's a bigger view. And I must say, in the 13 years I've been coming to design review, I can't tell if it's my advancing age or long COVID, but they're making less sense to me. So that may be my problem. But today, the parking issue is just like, I don't get it. I hope at some point we could take and write up for some of us, and then we can go get parking for dummies in Garden City. I have no idea where we're at with parking in Garden City. No idea. So I got a copy of a notice to dear property owner dated August the 12th. And one of the things it says here, official notice of intent to approve or deny the application. And then it goes on, the boundaries of the applicant's proposal must be notified of the city's intent to approve. And the wording sounds strange to me. Is an intent to review? Or is your intent to approve these? Is that was put in bold? So it's just, maybe that's a wording issue, but when you receive these, it felt like this is a done deal. But maybe that's just a poor interpretation on my part. I just bring that up for your consideration. In some specifics then, without going into too much detail, but when we look at site coverage, they add up to 108%. So that might be just some rounding errors, but we ought to be a little bit clear about 100% is the only site we got. So you can't go up to 100. But there could be rounding. Or my bad math. A little bit of both. The other issues that concern me is that when we get into details and it talks about may not be compliant, may not be compliant, may not be compliant. I'm not going to go through the specifics. Is this, in the words, a seasoned application? Or why don't we know if it's either compliant or not compliant? What's the research? Is that what's supposed to happen at these meetings? Or is there some staff and applicant that has to come on? So before you present to the public, it's either compliant or not compliant. But the maybes are confusing. One last thing. It mentions waterways and it says no water available from the Boise River. The issue, I used to know some stuff about irrigation. I think irrigation is close by, one property away, I think the next door property. So is irrigation a requirement? I know on new subdivisions under city municipal code, it is required to use surface irrigation. I'm not sure this qualifies as a subdivision. I have no idea. So maybe in wrapping up, we talk about the folks not being car-centric. And I want to applaud the applicant. The idea of having a shared vehicle, electric vehicle, innovative thinking like that, 1,000% supportive. Fantastic. I have no idea what that fully means in terms of parking, but my word, we're in a bind. We're in a bind. This is the summer of the 100-degree record for our valley. And I get very concerned about these tree requirements and how we're going to have shaded streets so that you can get from that house to Jenah, maybe where there might be public transportation and not drop in the process with the heat. And I'm not sure that I feel comfortable that the city is being really, really good about these landscaping requirements and making sure that you have the affordable water to get those trees. I had a 2.5-inch caliper tree requirement when I applied for my house. It's out front. Now, I'm very fortunate that I have had irrigation water. And I put on 5 hours of water on a weekend, on a Saturday for that tree. That tree is now from a 2.5 to about a 12 to 13 inch across diameter. And it's 2 stories tall. And when the cars that are finding parking, they park underneath the tree. People stop underneath the tree. In the rest of the community, we don't have that kind of stuff. And I'm hoping that when we look at an application like this, that we have the responsibility, because that tree won't, it took 13 years to get it. Or less than 18. It's getting shady in some of this stuff. That's what we have a responsibility to plan for. I'm not sure with it. With some of our work here. So that was rambling. I appreciate your patience. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Landry? All right. Is there anybody else in person that wishes to testify on this matter? Seeing none, I'll go to Zoom. If you wouldn't mind using the raise your hand feature, if you wish to testify. Belinda Isley.
Hi, my name is Belinda Isley. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay. I own and live in the building directly across the street from this proposed project. And I believe that Hanna has a graphic that sort of shows the size and scale of this building. Your design review application specifically asks how the project will advance in urban form through its relationship to the street and adjacent buildings. And the proposed buildings, as you can see, my duplex that is across the street is shown on the right. The proposed building is shown on the left. This is to scale. My duplex is 24 feet tall. This building, I believe, is 72 feet tall. You can clearly see that in comparison to my duplex, which is one of the taller buildings actually within a couple block radius, that it's not congruent at all in relationship with adjacent buildings. And I understand that urban forms are fluid and they adapt with every new building. But in my opinion, the size, scale, and mass of this project, it just doesn't advance the urban form to say very little about the non-existing landscaping in front of this building. It's just a giant building. I know that people have talked a lot about the off-street parking and it being not compliant with code. So I don't want to be repetitious, but I would like to point out that the developer, by not providing adequate parking, and I believe it is not adequate parking at all, they're creating a hardship for the residents in this building and for the entire neighborhood. I mean, our street parking, regardless of how they counted, our street parking's at maximum level from 32nd to 36th Street. All those streets dead end into the river. And so it's not a fluid way. You drive in, you have to turn around and drive back out. It's heavily used for river access, to say nothing about push and pour. That street is constantly, there's no parking on that street. And when the developer mentioned that maybe their little commercial space would be a coffee shop, I just kind of freaked out, because that's going to bring so many cars that you can't even believe it. And I think if the developer thinks that, their argument that those art spaces, those studio spaces are going to be rented by residents in their building, no one can foresee the future and they can't guarantee that. So if those are remain open, they are going to absolutely offer them and rent them to people that do not live in the building, which will bring more cars into the area. And if they want us to think that, oh, artists are going to ride scooters and bicycles to their art spaces, well, let me tell you, with 100% confidence, because I am an artist, that the supplies that I haul around and the art pieces that I finish would not fit on a scooter or a bicycle. I need a car. And I absolutely love the idea of their car share, but none of us are ready to get rid of our cars right now, especially artists. And I just don't think that we can base a decision as important as this on hoping that everyone's going to trade in their car for a bike or a scooter and embrace car share. I mean, what are those people going to do after they don't rent in that building anymore? If they rent in that building, are they going to immediately sell their car? No, I don't think they are. When I constructed my duplex, I was required by code to be compliant with the off-street parking and with all the parking requirements. And I recently completed 2 pre-app meetings for a home that I want to construct on the back of my lot. And the city made it very clear that I was to supply the correct number of parking spots as per the code. So I feel that if this design was modified to comply with the parking, that it would follow that the size and scale and mass would be much more congruent with the neighborhood, which includes already, as someone else already mentioned, several already approved projects in the neighborhood, none of which are this size or scale or height. And you know, developers may not like the code. I sometimes don't like the code because it limits their bottom line. But at the end of the day, the code was created to protect the integrity of our neighborhoods and to foster responsible growth. And I do not think that this project in any way, shape, or form does that at all. I would ask that you require this project to be code compliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Isley? All right, is there anybody else who wishes to provide testimony on Zoom? All right, seeing none. Oh, Jason, Mr. Jones.
Hey, I figured I might as well speak since everybody else did. So I just want to, I really just want to get into the code piece of this, since I think the parking stuff is still coming up and I think there's some confusion. Can I share my screen? Let me see here. Can I share content here? Let's see. So I can do this. Can everybody see what I'm sharing? Can y'all see that?
No.
No. Did you hit the screen share down at the
I
bottom?
did. Yeah, let me try again. Share screen. Start broadcast. All right, can you see me now? Okay. So I want to just make sure it's clear that this project is a mixed use project and that there are very specific standards for those mixed use projects for parking. So there's two sections of code for parking in Garden City's code. There's residential uses only, and then there's non-residential and mixed uses. And I think if you look at the section of code, this is obviously a mixed use project. I don't think anybody in here has denied that it's a mixed use project. And so the real reality is, if you look at it, it basically says, hey, the parking is going to be determined by the planning official based on a whole bunch of things here. And, like I said, there's a list, but there clearly is no objective standard to that parking. It doesn't say, hey, you're going to have one parking space for every 300 square feet or 1,500 square feet. It also doesn't say each residential is going to have 1/2 of a guest parking space or 2. And I want to make sure that it's also real clear to the design review that this already went to court and a judge said that the city can't enforce this after the fact determination. And I think it probably, in my mind, since it looks like this is going to go to city council, I think it's probably a good point that maybe the city would include that document as part of this hearing so that it would be on the record, so that city council people could actually see that a judge basically said they cannot delegate to someone else to determine what the standards are on a development by development basis, and that there has to be a clear standard if you want to enforce parking code. And right now, this as a mixed use project, literally the parking code is on a case-by-case basis. And there is no specific parking code for mixed use. And I think it really is important to kind of make sure that we're clear that you're not looking at this residential code, because this actually qualifies as Part B. And I think, like I said, having said that, I know there's obviously a lot of tension over where the parking is going to be and whether it's going to be on the street. But I think the bigger picture here is that part of the reason the city had this mixed use separately is to encourage mixed use projects where parking could be waived when people can just walk to where they work. And I know there's some argument about whether people will live and work on that site, but I think it's irrelevant anyway, because if we have more workspaces in this neighborhood, it benefits everybody in the neighborhood. There's more possibilities for you to actually live and work in this neighborhood, even if it's not at the same site. And that's the reason for those reductions in parking. And that's always been the purpose of it. And like I said, I think if this design review thinks they can deny this based on parking, it's going to get overturned in court if the city council agrees with you. And so it makes no sense to me to like keep pushing something that's already been decided. And like I said, there seems to be some confusion with what should apply, but I want to make sure it's clear. None of the parking stuff that's in the staff report applies here. The staff by code has a right to determine it, but I do believe that that right to determine it has now been ruled illegal by a judge. And so if the staff thinks that they can decide it and enforce it, I think that's the part that's going to be problematic here going forward. And so I just want to kind of point that out, because like I said, I don't want you guys to get into a situation where you're basically getting sued again for the exact same thing you got sued again before. And I think that, like I said, it doesn't make sense to try to, like I said, pretend like this project doesn't meet the parking code, because there is no parking code for mixed use projects. It's determined on a case by case basis by the planning official based on some criteria here, but that has been ruled illegal. And so it can't be enforced. So I just want to put that on the record just to make sure we're all on the same page going forward.
Any questions for Mr. Jones? Any other individuals wishing to provide testimony? All right, I will.
Belinda has her hand up again, but I know she already spoke, so it's.
No,
it's up
I
to you,
have a
Jill.
question for Jason.
Could you please do that offline? In that you've already provided your testimony, so has Mr. Jones. And with that, I can turn this over to the applicant for any rebuttal.
Kathy Sewell with Platform. First, just want to address Ms. Olkenstein's comments. So to be clear, the project Garden City Code for residential requires 1 bedroom units, 1 parking stall. Anything over 2 bedrooms, 2 parking stalls. Our project provides 17 parking spaces. 15 of those we have 15 residential units. So each unit has 1 parking stall. So everybody can bring their car to the site. And we use this criteria in initially planning the project because we knew parking was an issue. We knew that we were a small site. You know, part of what the comp plan encourages for the live work area is maintain the small lot development size, the existing small lots, and discourages larger type development. So with that said, trying to provide parking for in a zone and for the comp plan that wants to have urban character and provide density and provide the types of uses that will build that city vision for the site. You know, our goal was, okay, how can we park the site, maximize the parking on the site? But with this project, it was very important for Bree and Matthew to have some kind of pedestrian commercial presence on the ground floor, to interact with the neighborhood, to serve the neighborhood, because as more people move into the neighborhood, there needs to be more services for those neighbors and the residents. Right now, there's a lot of residential use around there. So with any kind of mixed use density project, multi-story, we have to deal with parking, 20-foot wide, you know, entry into the parking garage. We have to deal with stairs and setbacks. You know, Garden City has 5-foot setbacks, 10-foot landscape setbacks for when you're adjacent to different uses. So as we start to see our, 100-foot of lineal footage shrink because of things we have to accommodate, it's suddenly becoming very clear that our priorities were, how much can we park this and what else can we provide that's left over? And we knew that we had to provide, and I know this is getting a little bit involved, but this is really that I just want to express that we worked long and hard to solve how to park the site, how to create the density for the site that is fit and is sufficient. Solid waste is a big issue. We worked with Public Storage because we had to create some kind of internal trash room so that they could access the site, and to do so, push that use to the front. So what was left was everything in the rear of the lot. And what we found after several iterations is that we could park 17 vehicles on the site. And it was absolutely for sure that one of those had to be an electric vehicle car share for the facility. And we knew we had to provide an ADA accessible stall, which left 15 spaces. We knew, okay, 15 spaces, we could only make this project with 15 residential units, because we wanted to make sure everybody could bring a car to the site. So that left the car share. We researched car share throughout the country, and we found that Denver, which has a whole bunch of different zoning districts, but their car share ratio is, for every car share, they can reduce the parking reduction by 5. So that helped us, I guess, at least use a baseline for what we could do for our project. So we knew that we could do 10 cars, 1 car parked each, and that left 5 additional, which left over 5 2-bedroom units. So with that said, we thought, okay, we have this residential parking solved. Now, as we discussed in our letter and throughout, that the other parts of the project, the live work component, which is a mixed use component, as well as this small commercial part, also a part of the mixed use component, that there is no specific criteria for us to use to figure out what the requirement is. We did review the section and understood that the planning official would determine what that is based on certain criteria. So we did our homework and trying to figure out, okay, what really are we trying to do? And how can we provide information within our application, within our design, that will provide, assistance to come up with that number. And so, as Ms. Veal mentioned, we are in the Searle Mitchell overlay, but we're unable to, fully comply with all the provisions, primarily because of building height and lot coverage. But within that code section, it does specifically state, it does mention parking. There is a parking section within that does get into any, all the live spaces need to have 1 parking stall, but any workspaces under 500 square feet do not require a parking stall. So we thought, well, this is at least some criteria that we can use to design our work units. And so each of these units is well under 500 square feet. And Bree and Matt, their intention was never to create large work units, because, as you mentioned, and I believe this was Ms. Folkenstein also mentioned this in her comments about the flexibility that we mentioned with how we organized our work units, is that we wanted, a big part of our project was to create a courtyard space for the studio walks and real collaborative space for the artists. And to do so, we created this courtyard up above, basically because we had no ground area to do anything, because we're trying to provide the on-street or off-street parking. But around that then became the idea of organizing all of these work units around this courtyard, to where during those Friday strolls, people could walk up and see an artist's work out in that courtyard space, very active space. Each workspace has also an exterior deck area where they can, take something out, spray it, whatever. But the intent is that these work units are together with each other and working together with one another, and are separate from the live units. I mean, I think the idea of incorporating the work unit into a live unit up on the 3rd floor for us just meant that's more people come and going, or just it didn't create the kind of vibe that Bree and Matt were looking for. So back to parking real quick, apologies. So the other parts of the project that we had to try and solve were the guest parking. We understood that, there are people that are going to come see the residents in the that live in the building. But we did review what Garden City did have for the residential guest parking requirement. And basically, for every 2 units, you have to have 1 guest parking stall. We thought this seemed excessive based on the urban character and where we were. And so we looked to the neighbor, Boise, to see what their parking standards were. And for multifamily developments, it's 1 parking stall per 10 dwelling units. So we came up with 2 seems appropriate for the 15 that we're providing. And, you know, we went with the work units at under 500 square feet, no parking required for those based on what we could find in Garden City Code. The commercial part, the 600 square foot on the ground floor, we thought that is small enough. It's meant to support, you know, either a worker who might live in the neighborhood, might live upstairs. But that there's we thought there was minimal amount of parking that would be required for that. With that said, there are two street parking spaces in front of our space. We did the parking study and understand that that the existing developments or lack of in the area, there is available street parking, though it's not really defined because there's not a good sidewalk curb gutter system yet put in place. Our project will, you know, start that process along this block, but there is also the public parking lot around the corner. And in reviewing the comp plan and how Garden City's, you know, encouraging people to come to the area, come down to the Greenbelt, come to the water park, all of which are not supported by people who actually live there right now, but they're, you know, up on the Boise Bench or wherever. So there's mention of satellite parking lots that may come online at some point. And so I think our thought is that as the area continues to grow, there's likely going to be some public parking area in place. But till then, we think that the parking lot around the corner, the existing street parking can satisfy the 2 guest parking stalls that were proposed, the 2 guest units we're proposing, and, you know, the minimal, maybe 2 for the small commercial space, which, you know, Ms. Fulkenstein did mention in her comments that that's the place for those folks on the street, in the parking lots. That's where guests and visitors typically park. So then just quickly, I guess, try, in terms of Mr. Werges's comments, the size of the project and height, correct, there is no height limit in the C2 district. And yes, this is a tall building with its, you know, when you look at its surrounding existing properties. Anticipate at some point in time, those will get redeveloped, but they also might not. But this situation occurs in other cities. You know, for example, you know, Barganika in downtown Boise, small single-story building, next to it are fairly large structures. So I don't know what we can say about that other than it's going to change. And, you know, right next door, I think to Miss Isley's place is the Soul subdivision, which I believe has 4+ stories associated with that, and a much larger development in terms of scale and mass. Which that kind of addresses some of Mr. Landry's comments. So I think just to sort of reiterate the parking point, we did our best, void of any real specific criteria that Garden City could provide us in terms of providing parking for our mixed use components of the project. So I think that might be it.
Thank you.
Unless.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I actually just wanted to say thanks to the neighbors for sharing your comments, and it's really inspiring to be part of like an engaged community. So truly, even though there are like clearly ways that we don't see eye to eye on the way that we propose this or that we're planning the project, like we get it and we appreciate it, and we're gonna live here, and so we're not trying to be jerks with any of this. So thank you. I also just want to say that you know, for some of the comments that refer to like, you know, normal life is having several cars, or I think it was Ms. Isley that said, you know, none of us are ready to get rid of our cars, and there's this dependence and we don't have enough places to walk to. We're not asking or expecting anybody to give up their cars, and we're not asking or expecting anybody who needs or wants more than one car for each unit to live in the building. And we do walk around Garden City by foot now. We walk to Roots, we walk to the different bars and restaurants, we walk to visit neighbors, we walk to visit artists. And we did do a lot of conversation and consultation primarily with artists to think about this space and to think about what they would want and what would make their lives better. And one of the things that kept coming back was that they would love to get rid of their car. As long as, to Ms. Isley's point, there wasn't a vehicle that could help them when they needed to go to shows, when they needed to go present at galleries. And so we addressed that issue. And so I just want to say, we hear you, and also, I guess, say that there is another perspective, and we're not looking to change other people's minds, but believe that there are 15 people to rent 15 units who have a shared mindset about reducing car use. Maybe you have more.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would like to add is that this is our first project in Garden City. I did work on a project about a mile away along State Street, but in Boise city limits, slightly smaller lot. Also, it was rezoned to have an unlimited height. It's 105 units with 32 parking spaces. And it's going to be great. It's going to be much needed, and it's going to be buildable, and it's going to fill up with people that need and want that kind of opportunity in the valley. That would feel to us like the wrong scale, even though it would fit within the Garden City Code. We made decisions about this. We understood that there would be neighbors that would potentially be building taller buildings than ours because there is no height. Casino Beach has a 6-story building 2 blocks away. We'll see how the neighborhood unfolds, but we worked to scale this to a size that works for the community we're trying to be a part of. So
I think just lastly, like it's been evolving, right? Like, especially with parking into, Kathy's comments, thanks, that's way better than my comments, but that it's been an evolving process, working with the city, which has been great, to learn and explore, and that really the application we presented, the project we presented today is where we landed after spending a ton of time with the code and a ton of time with Hanna, and with the city. So just, yeah, thank you both and for listening. And thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant team? Thank you. Thank you. Alrighty. I'll open this up for discussion. And while the committee members are getting there, I just do want to point out how the city has reviewed mixed use applications. There's nothing to preclude reviewing other the land uses by mixed use. And so the number one criteria is to review the specific uses on property. And so staff has historically reviewed that as meaning to review the residential component under the residential standards. And then there is the commercial standard as well. And so there is precedent for that being utilized in that manner.
Yeah, I'll go first and kind of start the discussion on that piece of it. Yeah, I think that the precedents and the amount of projects, mixed use projects that we've reviewed in the past, and with this same criteria, and had there been small deficiencies mitigated with alternative transportation incentives and increased bicycle parking and some other creative ideas to offset the shortfall in parking. For me, there's kind of I guess a threshold there that it seemed reasonable as an offset when we looked at each of those specific conditions with the mitigation measures. But I guess on this, it feels to me that it is significantly deficient, and looking at the fact of the number, how much deficient it is. I guess in my view, I tend to to look at it and say, well, okay, is it too much for the size of this piece of property? Because of the significant deficiency in parking. If it didn't have the commercial spaces up there on the second floor, which would reduce it by that amount. And then looking at maybe, okay, it's deficient just in the residential by a smaller amount, even if it's one per unit or something. Okay, well, maybe. But just looking at how we've reviewed mixed use in the past, and I guess I don't feel comfortable saying that this meets the intent of the code and how these projects have always been looked at. That's just on the parking thing, and I think, Derek, we can have some discussion on that. Love to get your point of view on that. I still, beyond that, it doesn't appear that really much was done with the residential connection to the street that I indicated was an issue that I had on the pre-app. And I still have that same issue now. It does not have, the primary use is the residential function. I guess I don't feel that requirement is met by just a statement that folks are going to be coming in through the coffee shop or the commercial space there, and that commercial space lends the identity as an entry point for the residents of the building. I just don't feel that it meets that requirement in the code, which is the 84B-4 section. So those are the two, I guess, the two main issues that need discussion. And so I guess I'll turn it over to you, Derek, if you got some comments.
Yep, and then the third thing would be height. We can loop back around on height as well. But parking first. There's mixed use, there's residential, there's commercial, and I'm looking at this like, what's it most like? If we're talking about precedence, what's it most like? And it's most like Live, Work, Create, Park 33, where there was small commercial, where under 500 square feet equaled 0 parking. So I'm looking at, in my mind, like, what's this most like? But then I come back to, well, it doesn't matter what I feel like or what Brett feels like or what the neighbors feel like, it's what's code and how does code interpret it. And so then we're given this, we have precedence of this project and precedence of that project and precedence of this project, but ultimately we have recent precedence that says, this code doesn't apply, and it's up to the planning director, which is, not really a legal way to make parking. So we're left with this kind of, who's going to litigate this to determine how much parking there should be, right? And so that's a confusing proposition to be in when we're asking about how much parking this project should have. And then so when we take pieces and parts of the code and read, the part about alternatives to parking, that's what encourages me, I think, is alternatives to parking standards are encouraged in the code. And then here we have a project that is proposing an alternative that no one has proposed before. And then I look at it in the big picture of, society, and I say, well, what if this works? What if this is a development that has a shared car that's part of the development, not just a zip car that you see on the street in Portland and you can walk 3 blocks to get one. This is a car that lives in this development. And what if that works? And what if the intention of this, development is to attract people that don't want a car and don't want to pay a premium for an apartment because it has a bunch of excess parking, and, then it works. So if I take a part of code that says alternatives are encouraged, and then I look at this alternative that hasn't been proposed before, I want to use that alternative to say, yeah, it should have less parking than is required. So to me, I can take all of those, I can take a piece of the 500 square foot or less doesn't require parking, and I can take a piece that says alternative is encouraged, and I can take a piece that says every residential unit already has a car, already has a parking spot for it, and I can say, yes, this is parked sufficiently. And that's kind of, I'm leaning more in that direction than saying, oh, this needs 18 more parking spots or 22 more parking spots or how many ever that is. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with parking. And as far as the entries are concerned, there was a few things I think I read in the staff report, and I can see in some of the renderings that there is signage on the side of those residential sides now, and it does look like there was elements that were added to open those up and encourage that. And then we go to what's the primary use? Is the primary use residential? Or I think there was a suggestion in the applicant's presentation that said by volume of people, the primary use is going to be the commercial space on the main level. Therefore, the commercial entry is the primary entry. So I think there's some confusion there of the primary use by volume of square footage is residential, but the primary use by foot traffic is the commercial unit on the main. So I'm not sure how to determine that. And maybe there's more effort made to accentuate the residential entry, and that satisfies it. But I don't know what the best solution from that is, because I had yet to determine it as like primary being traffic versus primary being, volume of square footage, and height considerations. Unlimited to me means unlimited. And yes, this building looks taller than the duplex across the street, but it's, as tall as it needs to be to satisfy this development. Could it be 50 feet taller? It could be, according to current code. So if there's an effort to change code or, have a lower density in this neighborhood, then that's the effort that needs to be made. It can't be made on a project by project basis. So as far as height's concerned, it's a non-starter, non-argument, because it's allowed per code. And we can't make an arbitrary determination that 100 feet is okay and 110 is not. So that's my thoughts on heights. And then maybe we loop back to parking, and maybe staff has some additional comments on that.
Yeah, I'm in agreement on the height. There is no limit. So the parking, I can understand where you're going with that, and looking at the live work and that kind of comparing it to that with the under 500 square foot. I get that, and I could probably get on board with that. However, just the residential component and the lack of vehicles for those units, I think it's just too much. I mean, we do have a adopted code standard for residential parking that's specific. If it didn't have that little commercial component there, this is what it would be. And,
right.
And we've allowed an offset, but what is that? Is it a 50% offset? No. Is it? I mean, what is that threshold? And I just feel, what is the difference here from what the code requires compared to what is provided? So required 28, provided 17, deficient by 11.
Yeah, that's
And-
guest and one for the
That's right.
commercial or something.
And
like that, right?
I still think even in an urban setting, you're still gonna have guest parking needs
Right.
to a
So
residential use.
that deficiency in my mind is made up for all of these alternatives that have been provided, which is, the on-site car, in essence, something no one's ever proposed before. So we don't have like, hey, this guy did it down on Adams Street and it worked, and there's actually empty parking spots. Like, we don't have that, but I think if alternatives are encouraged in the code, then this is a great one to see what works. And there is no number in the code that says if you have an electric car that any guest can use at any time, it equals 10 parking spots. That doesn't, that's where we get into the per planning director, which is, which also doesn't work according to the Supreme Court.
And that the part about the court's decision and the lack of specificity in the code, in my mind, almost makes me feel like, okay, we should just continue this indefinitely until that code section is more specific to deal with this type of application, rather than taking the position that because there was litigation on another project, that means that it's whatever any applicant wants to decide for their parking, if it's a mixed use, whether they want to have no parking or they want to have one stall per 20 units, or I guess I just have a hard time not basing a review or an approval on some methodology that is it has either that we utilize because we felt that is what the interpretation of the code was.
Right.
I guess I'm a little.
Yeah. And I think I've stated the methodologies that I would use to get there, regardless of, court cases and precedences and what we should be looking at and what we shouldn't be looking at. But so I'm using those things. And I think the biggest one is they've proposed an alternative. They've proposed a number of alternatives, and they've proposed a new alternative, which we don't have a X equals X number of parking spots. And to me, it feels, and again, who cares what I feel? What I feel is not code, but to me, it works. And my recommendation would be that the parking is sufficient, given the testimony, given the documents that we have in the record, et cetera.
I guess I'm not prepared to make a motion because I can't get behind the reduced number of parking, or what's being proposed here. And I guess I would need to see a better, more direct entry focal element that provides an identity for that the residential component on the street, before I feel that it meets the code's intent with that section.
And I know where you're coming from on that, and I'm not I can get behind that request, And I think it would be a stronger project with that. So that may be something that we continue that and then they come back to us with that modification. And maybe there's some way to, you know, staff can jump in. Maybe there's some way to continue that this is, you know, that's what we're looking for in the next hearing. And it's not we don't need to hear the entire presentation from the applicant or from staff again.
And well, there's a lot going on here. There certainly, it could be a request that for a continuance on a specific component. In the past, we've done that based on agreement and the other components by the committee. We're in an interesting situation where we don't have a tiebreaker with the committee at this time, having two committee members and staff as an ex officio non-voting member. And so it may be an interesting situation where there's an impasse between the committee members from what I'm hearing on discussion. In that case, because there wouldn't be a tiebreaker or a majority vote, it would go to council.
So you're not a tiebreaker in this case?
I'm not, no.
Okay. Were you ever? Well, I guess there would have never been a tie if we had three.
I cannot remember a situation where I would have weighed in, but I know that it's definitely been cleaned up that staff is ex officio.
Okay. And Brett, your thoughts on in some instances where there's been an element that got cleaned up by the applicant, staff would review it. Is this entry element something that you would want to see, or is that something that you could articulate some direction to the applicant and then they could
No, I feel it's something that needs to be,
okay,
that needs to be seen
okay,
by us. I mean, the commercial component has got an identity. It's a storefront on the street.
yeah,
And if, depending on what that use is, what that commercial use is, if it's a coffee shop or it's this or that, whatever, it's gonna have signage as such, advertisement as such, and so on and so forth. It's not going to have the identity of the residential component of the building. Every one of these mixed use projects that we've looked at, I've always looked for that. Show me how that component connects with the street. And this one, I feel that it falls short. I feel that it has two secondary accesses that are not, and I'm looking at this also as in, ultimately it could develop that you've got another building that, you know, fronts the street on either side with the same type of setbacks and really gives you that the street frontage is that front facade plane, and not that you're skirting down the side between two buildings to get into this entrance that really doesn't have a significant identifiable element on the street. And I think to see what that is I don't think it's something that I would feel comfortable having staff review it and not seeing it, because I think it's going to be an integral part of the overall design somehow.
yeah. So we can leave them with that direction, and I don't know that, I think logistically our next meeting is so close that they may not have time to prepare for that, so we can continue and
Well, I guess, I mean, are we continuing? I mean, I think each of us sees things a little bit different on the parking.
if we make a motion and it dies, then it goes to council, then it could possibly go to council without the entry changes. Right? And we wouldn't want them to remand it back to us for entry changes if they happen to read what we said and agreed with that on the entry change. If we can do it.
You know, I do understand what you're saying, and whether I don't know, maybe Jenna, you can weigh in. I mean, I think that it if we're not able to approve it, and basically it just goes to council with other outstanding elements that we had here unresolved, I guess in my mind, it would be likely that those elements would still need to be resolved after council. So does it make sense? And maybe it's more for, does the applicant want to get as much resolved at this point, or get the big item that is on the table, the parking, dealt with prior to worrying about the entry component? Right.
I guess if we're looking to me to weigh in, I think the discussion has been fairly well vetted, that the options are council either approves or denies the application. Should they approve it, they may not remand for the entry. They may find it to be approved as is. To Derek's point, if it's important to have that reviewed. So there's no definite, I guess is what I'm saying.
Then I would be inclined to move to continue to a date certain, in order to see the compliance with that 8-4B-4.
To the point of the proximity of the next meeting, staff might suggest that a date certain of October 3rd would be something that may give the applicant actual time to address that component and resubmit materials.
Because the next hearing, they would need to have materials submitted by when? Tomorrow or 2 days ago?
Yeah.
It would be next Monday, 7 days in advance to the September 19th.
And that would give and that if the committee is comfortable with that staff review, because that wouldn't give the staff any time to review it.
Well, if it's just that element, that might be okay on the fly. And I guess, so that puts the question in Kathy's court, and she can nod her head, say, yeah, that's doable, or say, no way, push it to the next one.
Ask questions?
I technically no, but I think if it may help perhaps the committee make their decision, if that's.
If I just.
They won't be able to hear you unless you're at a microphone.
Hi, sorry, appreciate the grace on the moment, just for clarification, just so that we don't unnecessarily add time and expense there. Derek was referring to the choice between the foot traffic versus the square footage as what defines the main entry. And the code defines main entry as users. So the commercial space would have more users in a day and in general than the residential space.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the staff's report, identified this as a multifamily residential project, and that section referred to entry. for that type of structure or use. This is a mixed use project that has commercial use, it has residential use, it has access up to a courtyard for the live workspace. So we can't apply a multifamily project, and staff mentioned the trail winds in their report for parking situation. Trail winds to me over by Veterans is a multifamily project, mass parking lot, lots of units, lots of building that needs a center primary entry point, even though there's probably several around there for exiting. That to me is a multifamily project. This is a mixed use that has a primary entry for the commercial space. The residents do not go through the commercial space to get to their lobby and access their units. That has been mentioned in staff report. That is incorrect. The residents have their own primary entry, their own private entry, because this is not a public type use where we want people coming up, you know, anytime during the day. So I guess we can go back and revisit it, but we think that there's been some incorrect categorization of this project as a multifamily. It is mixed use, you know, 100%.
It is a mixed use project. It has a multifamily component, as well as a commercial component. And I feel that that my interpretation of the code is that those components need to have a connection to the street. And so I just feel that it doesn't comply.
And so then back to the question, do we continue to the 19th or do we continue to the, what's the next one? The 3rd, October 3rd. And I'll suggest, or I think Brett, you may already have made a motion to continue to the
Date
certain of the next one,
the 19th.
19th. So I'll
Then
say
if there's not significant time,
yeah,
they can
just push it out.
Yeah, continued again.
Yep.
And I hear that's a motion, and is that a motion in a second?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you. I did notice that those that testified, many were lacking email. What we can do is keep this particular application updated should there be any changes right on the application link on our website. Thank you. And with that, we will move on to design review fiscal year 2022, number 15. Jory Delgado is requesting a new multifamily construction project located at 3941 North Reach Street. Yeah, we can just go. That's fine.
Hello, my name is Jory Delgado. I'm here to present for the Arabella Lofts. I just, for the sake of time, I'm just going to make this as quick as possible. I'm just going to note a couple of the things that we have changed from the pre-app. As you can see, we moved that front parking space back to the back side of the building. We also put some stamped concrete in front of the garages
that goes towards the entrances of each building to make more of a pathway to each one. We also created larger decks to meet that private open space for each of the units. And then we've also added some private garden area for some of the units. Also, it was noted in there about the fences. It's hard for us to kind of determine the fences right now as the property next to us, Violet's Crossing, is currently being developed. So we're not really sure what we're going to do down the middle of that. We think that landscaping is going to be the best, but we also need to figure out a way to make sure that those two landscape plans really mesh well. I believe both landscape plans right now show plants in that area. So we might need to look at those landscape plans and make sure that they actually mesh well together. Waterways and irrigation, there's no irrigation ditches within the property. Violet's Crossing is going to be connecting to city water. So our property is also going to be connecting to city water. Our mitigation report was missing in the submittals. We're in the process of that. The arborist that we have working on that is pretty backed up right now, but we do intend to get that in before any other meeting. And then waste and recycle, that was a topic of discussion during the pre-app. We plan to bring all of the recycling and trash out to Reed Street, which after looking at the Violet's entitlements, it looks like they also got approved to bring them out to Reed Street. So we feel to keep that block cohesive and easy for public services, it's just the best way is to pull it all out to Reed Street so that they don't have to go into the development. And then just so we can touch on the windows. I know that it was talked about that they're looking directly into the back of Violet's Crossing as well. As Violet's Crossing is being developed and moving into the construction phases, they have also looked at some of their windows, as we have too, and it does not look like their window plan lines up with ours. I'm more than happy to pull up those windows with that architect as well. I don't have their updated window plan, but I do know that it was looked at and that the windows do not look into each other. Some of them probably look a little bit, but none of them are fully directing each other. And our landscape plan, we updated that as well. We were deficient 2 trees, which we have added to the front of the development. And this just shows our stamped concrete path in front of the garages to each of the entrances to the buildings with awnings over the front. I don't think that our first elevations showed awnings over it. So we do have awnings over each of the entrances to show that they're direct entrances into the units and into the stairs that go up to the 1-bedroom units. And it was also noted that our private garden beds may not be sufficient to make up for the lack of private open space that we have on 3 of our units. But I did walk a couple subdivisions and I was able to find that private open gardens or private gardens with unit numbers on them are utilized by people. So I just figured it was a good way to show this and that we were able to only need them for 3 of the units and not all 8 of them. And this is just our floor plans that were already submitted. These actually show our enlarged decks in these front areas to make that 80 square feet of private open space. It was also noted that the square footages were not included in the plans. I do believe that they were included on the floor plan pages, but I have included them in here just as a reference if you wanted to look back at them. And then as far as the elevations for material, none of that has changed from the pre-app. I'm not sure that there was any comments on things that you guys didn't like, except for the garage doors. You guys had noted that you wanted to see something that wasn't as flat and plain. So we feel that a garage door with maybe some windows or some type of texture would be sufficient in that. And with that, I will let Hannah do the staff report.
Thank you. Before you go away, Ms. Delgado, any questions for the applicant? All right. Thank you. Ms. Veal?
Good afternoon. I will just go through the staff report item by item as highlighted in the analysis. as far as the fence goes, or the fence conversation goes, it is conditioned in the decision document to require code compliant fencing upon placement or construction of that fencing. So the lack of fencing at this point in time is not too much of a concern. It just was noted in the landscape plans that there was fencing, and then that there wasn't fencing, there's existing fencing, so that there was a little room for confusion, but it is conditioned in there. So during the construction plan review and final inspection of the actual subdivision, we will, as staff, go over the fencing, making sure it's compliant. Garden City Code 84B4 speaks to the facades, the orientation of the structures, the windows, etc. Staff has noted that, staff has noted that the front facade of that building closest to Reed Street has changed based off of the pre-application conversations. But it may not appear to address the street and the public realm as much as the committee would like for it to address that public street, just based off of previous conversations with other applications. So staff has highlighted that section to indicate that further discussion should be had regarding that front facade facing Reed Street. Additionally, 84C4B speaks to the pedestrian connection of the site, especially in relation to the overall accessibility of the site. It does appear through Jory's renderings here that she's shown today that there is some kind of contrasting color on the common drive, but it wasn't clearly indicated on the site plans. And even with what is shown today, it doesn't look like there is a clear, concise pathway, especially across the intersection within the development itself. So conversation regarding pathway and connectivity should be had with the committee. Noting code as far as code, or what code says for connectivity. Every primary entrance of each dwelling unit is required to have a clear pathway to the public sidewalk that is provided on Reed Street. 84D5 speaks to parking code standards. The development does adequately park for itself. That's including residential dwelling unit parking requirements as well as guest parking requirements. However, I have highlighted that section of code because it does, the development does provide carport parking, and code is pretty specific about having enclosed parking. So really why it's highlighted is because staff was unsure if the enclosed parking should be considered the garage or if a carport can consider itself as enclosed parking space. So that needs to be a determination. I believe it is drafted in the decision document that the carports can act as the enclosed parking. As far as sidewalk standards go along Reed Street, a 5-foot wide detached sidewalk is required for code standards with the standard 6 or 8 foot wide landscape buffer. This is in compliance with ACHD's sidewalk code requirements as well. And the difference between 6 and 8 feet is the street trees, and if those buffers have a root barrier or not. In the landscape plans, it didn't appear that there were any street trees proposed within that buffer area. The landscape plan seemed a little preliminary in nature regardless. So it has been conditioned to where the 3 required street trees are to be within that buffer landscape area, or at least within the frontage with having 2 of those street trees in that landscape buffer. I know the lot is pretty narrow and we're working with clear vision triangles, and so that can be hashed out today, and then a little bit further into the construction plans review, if this is approved. And then lastly, common open space and private open space. So I did note that the square footage for each unit that is noted on the floor plans. So I was able to calculate that based off of the square footages provided and what the multifamily I don't know, tier system works out to be, is that the total common open space requirement is 1,900 square feet. And that's purely just based off of how many units are provided at what square footage. And the staff report goes into further discussion of that. In looking at the site plans and the landscape plans, it isn't extremely apparent that the common open space is adequate enough. There wasn't a separate site plan showing compliance with the common open space standards. There are specific requirements of common open space, such as like dimensional standards. So we definitely want to get the measurements of what the applicant thinks is considered common open space before this application is approved. Because again, without adequate common open space, and if this application is approved, it will be required to come back for re-review to allow for adequate common open space to meet those standards. And with that, I stand for question.
Any questions for Ms. Veal? Right, seeing none, is there anybody that wishes to provide testimony on this matter? I'm not seeing anybody with their hand raised. If I'm missing you, please speak up. All right, then I'll turn it back over to the applicant for rebuttal.
Just to comment on a couple of those points from the staff report. On the front facade of the building facing Reach Street, I don't have the new rendering of it, but we do intend to add the name of the subdivision and some type of artwork on the front of that building so that it's not as plain. So that's why there's only one awning over that staircase, because in that blank space above it, we intend to put the subdivision name. We just don't know what type of material that subdivision name sign is going to be made out of, but we do intend to put it there. The pathway, we do intend to make that out of a different color, a different material, maybe a stamped concrete, something that will show that it's different from where the cars are driving. It is going into garages, and then there is concrete pads that go directly into the unit. So we feel that kind of just a stamped concrete path or a path of some other material will be sufficient through that. And we don't feel that a lot of people are going to actually be walking through the subdivision with the green belt so close. If they're going to be going on walks or bike rides or something, they're going to be going over to the green belt and riding over there rather than up and down or through the subdivision. The carport spaces, we are willing to put garages on those and make them the one-car garages, but we just feel that that carport look changes up the buildings just a little bit, and it's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing to see the two buildings be different instead of just garages on every single one of them. And then as far as the frontage for the landscaping, I do believe that the frontage that we have presented on our landscape plan matches the landscape plan that was approved for Violet's Crossing. After looking at that, I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that they line up unless we're looking at an older version of Violet's Crossing, but I believe that it does line up with what was approved for them. And that's what we were basing it on, since they are going to be so close. We just didn't want to have different widths of items. And then the street trees, we did add some trees. We'll have to double check on the classes and make sure that they still are within code. But again, it's the vision triangle. So we don't want to put a tree in there that's too large. That's going to block that. That's going to end up growing and blocking that vision triangle. So we would need you guys to permit us to do that, or later on in the process, let ACHD weigh in on that and permit us to do that as we build that drive approach. And that's all.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I do have a question. Doesn't appear that the current landscape plan shows that connectivity access from the street, the sidewalk to all of the units. Is that correct, or is there something more?
So the newest landscape plan that I have in this, are you able to see my screen?
No, but yeah, if you could show that.
So it doesn't show it. I can also resubmit a colored landscape plan just so that it's more apparent, but with this landscape plan, that landscape in the frontage will continue on into that stamped concrete. So there will be more of a rounded curb on that end. So the landscaping will kind of stop there, and then we'll move into that stamped concrete, and then the entrance or the garage, the carport, and then the entrance to those units, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how you see that working with a raised stoop there into each of the units. And so you're traversing down there, stepping up, stepping down, stepping up, stepping down, stepping up, stepping down as you make your way down to those units. I mean, is that the concept for direct connectivity?
Essentially, it is, just because we are separating those garages. I know that it's not ideal, but we are trying to meet that requirement that every entrance have their own clear entrance. So we do like to have those steps there, and it does provide or more of a divide between whose garage is whose. So that was kind of the thought behind that. But I mean, more than happy to take away that step, but I feel like the step kind of breaks it up a little bit. And I don't know that anybody would be walking directly down that, but if so, I don't think it would be too much of an issue.
Well, yeah, I guess it's either you have a very distinct pedestrian spine that connects all those units, or it's intended that people walk down the drive aisle, the asphalt, to get to those. I mean, and which is what we don't want. I guess I'm just trying to get a feel of whether it is a identifiable pedestrian linkage that people would use. I mean,
And maybe that, that different textured brick, permeable paver, whatever it is that's making that path. Maybe that's even proud of it's drivable, right? But maybe that's proud of the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
So we've constrained vehicle traffic at the expense of pedestrian traffic, even though when fire needs access, they can drive on that pedestrian path.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's all built up there, and it's kind of a we say a drivable curb to get into the garages, or something of that nature. Just it seems a little it seems a little odd that, okay, it looks like a pedestrian connection, but it doesn't feel like one, because I'm stepping up and stepping down and stepping up, and it just, to me, it feels like, okay, we're doing it because we need to have it, but we know nobody's going to use it.
Yeah, I like that I like the stairs that give you the sense of entry. I do like that, but then we need the spine inside of those.
And I think you could have a rolled curb there getting into the garages or something of that nature, and just be able to keep that up, and really feels like, and then it transitions at the center access point. Yeah, it transitions down to street level, and then there's that, it's stamped concrete or whatever across that element, and then up back in front of the units, it's all raised up, something of that nature, just to really strengthen that. I think it's important enough.
If we did a rolled curb across the front of all of them, would that be acceptable? Because we're open to doing that. We were just trying to think of some other types of materials, but we are open to putting that rolled curb in here to where you're still able to nicely pull into your driveway, but it's also a divide and has more.
I think that I would be looking for something like that to strengthen that connectivity.
Okay, we can definitely add that.
And then I guess I really would like to see, you don't have anything that shows that street front facade.
I don't. Can I share my iPad?
If you connect to Zoom from the iPad.
So I have it on hand. I tried to add it on there and do it. You can send that to me. Is it just a PDF? Yeah. I just shared it with you. To come up.
Okay, so stop sharing on that.
And then this is the front facade facing Reed Street, and that's where we intend to somehow put the name up there. We're just not sure what type of material we want to put it on, but we do want to display the name of the subdivision there.
Yes, I really don't think that really addresses the street. It's the lack of fenestrations in there. I mean,
I think what I struggle with, I'm agreeing with you, Brett, but what I struggle with is that what does interact with the street is kind of like circulation space. It's not the eyeballs on the street that we talk about, that, you know, code speaks to how it interacts and engages, and you're kind of connected to the street, you're connected to the public. And it's almost, you know, it's like this is the fire escape in essence, right? It's just the circulation from garage to main living. It's a door and then you're immediately going to the stairs. It's not a living space in essence.
Would it be efficient or helpful if we added more windows to this portion and make it more of an open stairwell?
I think it definitely needs, it needs some more attention. It still feels like a side elevation with an entry door.
Yep, I agree. And while we're on this slide too, just to reiterate this rolled curb and pathway are we talking about the pathway being internal into the drive from this curb that is next to this landscaping? So from the curb next to the landscaping that's at the very bottom of the screen, 4 feet or 5 feet into the drive is the rolled curb.
No,
and that continues up a path.
No, it looks like it would be from where that curb is over to the building face would be the pathway. And then that would traverse in front of the drive, so that basically the rolled curb would be where that curb is in front of the units.
That's correct.
So the two cars are sort of in the pathway at this point. a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think they're pulled all the way in the garage.
Yeah, yeah, but just as a determination, yeah. So that pathway would continue through part of this landscape bed to the sidewalk in a straight line.
That's correct.
Thanks. And then maybe this is easier to look at on the landscape plan, but we can also see a hint of it here too about the guest parking that's in an important terminal view. One of the landscaping plans had landscaping shown, and then there was a note about artwork, which is basically interrupting our line of sight in a good way to focus on the landscaping and the art rather than down this long driveway and rather than into the guest parking that's at the very end. So that's important, something to address and, you know, perhaps design and show us in a rendering how the focus will be on that landscape / art element rather than a direct line of sight all the way down this property to the end, which ends in guest parking.
I guess the other comment that I have is relative to the adjacent Violet's Crossing. If they're 10 feet off as well, do they have decks out of their units too? I mean, I'm just looking at these decks and how close they come to the property line, approximately 2 feet or something like that to the property line, and just trying to get my mind around that relationship between those outdoor decks and the neighboring building, and the neighboring building has decks, and I don't know. It just.
From my knowledge, Violet's Crossing, not every one of their units has decks, and the ones that do, they're not full decks that you can walk out on. They're more of a for show area that doors open up to, but you can't they're not actually hanging far off of the building. They're actually not off the building at all. They're more for show.
Like
Okay.
yours, like the ones on this rendering that's showing. It's kind of like a Juliet balcony.
Yeah, except on this building, we actually expanded these some more to meet that private open space. So we
Okay.
added to the front and back ones on these, knowing that the back of Violet's Crossing didn't have actual decks.
Okay.
And that not every unit does on Violet's Crossing.
So I think there's some things that we need to see again, this street front elevation, the pathway, the terminal view, and then some things, common open spaces, things that Hanna mentioned previously. So we can leave this open and continue it to a date certain.
We can do that. Again, a similar conversation on the availability of staff's review, depending on time. And so again, I might suggest the October 3rd meeting to provide time for the applicant to submit and staff to review.
I'd move to propose this to a date certain of October, what'd you say it was, 3rd? Yep.
3rd. Mhm.
1 second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is there any way we could do the September 19th one? We could have these corrections to the next day or so.
It wouldn't give staff enough time to review the changes.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you guys.
All right, is Andrew Massoud, our representative here? Staff had wondered if that may happen. and not hearing from the applicant on this, I guess there are a couple of options. We could continue it to notify them if they're not here at the next meeting, that it would be denied, deemed denied. Or I guess the committee could review the materials and make a determination. Now, I do want to note for the public, it's under public hearings, but it's actually an appeal hearing.
And can we review it and make comments without the applicant here, or is that ill-advised?
I would think that it's somewhat ill-advised because the applicant would not have the ability to rebut.
Okay. So we don't continue it, then we just say, push it, what?
Well, this one doesn't need to be noticed, and so
Okay.
you could actually just not move on it, and we'll make sure for the next meeting if it needs to be noticed or not.
Okay.
Agreed.
Thank you.
And then just a quick reminder too, I have a hard stop at 6:30.
All right, thank you for that reminder. And so those that are still in attendance, please note that there's a half hour. And we are done with the hearings for tonight. Thank you. And we'll move into the pre-application and discussion items. The first item for discussion is design review fiscal year 2022, number 22, and Erstad Architects. I believe Katrina Colm and specifically is requesting a new construction and multifamily project located at 233 and 311 East 47th Street. I'd like to invite you up to the microphone.
But either way, we can pull it up on the website.
Okay.
It might take a second to load.
We do not have flash drive.
That's
easier.
probably.
Make sure that it doesn't go anywhere.
And then I think between sharing the different PDFs, you might have to exit out a share screen and then go back. Okay, so that makes sense. All right, Katrina Colm with Erstad Architects, 310 North 5th Street, Boise, Idaho. We are here to present 47th Street Apartments. There will be 60 rental units on this 2-acre site. It's on 47th, just south of Adams Street. We are hoping to fill a much needed housing problem in the area with professional work units. We feel this is a compatible use based on the residential area that is surrounding it. Our site plan, we really focused the units very residentially. We made the front entrances, face courtyard space and or well landscape space on the perimeter with garages on drive aisles as needed, as well as the parking in the back. We've tried to focus a lot of the amenity space central to all of the buildings that are on site. The building masses themselves take the 2 units and start to push and pull that mass to really give those long elevations a lot of articulation. And these are just the overall unit plans here. Again, there's garages on the first floor, main entrance on the first floor. You'll go to the second floor, which will have your kitchen living space, and your third floor will be your bedroom space. As you can see in these specific unit plans, we will have units that meet accessibility. So they are still a 2-story unit, but they will have a lift inside to meet those requirements. Our elevations are going to be a mix of materials, very common to the area and the style of the area, where we'll have a masonry base, stucco. Some of the masses that step back will have the cement board, and then we're providing some wood accents on our balconies, as well as some of the headers for some of the windows. Again, you can see in this diagram here, the front entries, balconies, everything we're trying to focus inward to the amenity space or the landscape space. Again, different building elevations. So I wanted to call your attention to these couple of images up top here. We've got barbecue areas, some type of play court. We're still deciding what that's going to be. Bocce ball has been mentioned, but we'll define that as we move forward. There will be a children's play area. Again, just making the entries and the balconies really dynamic to that space. The bottom image you can see is facing adjacent property. And so it'll have enough trees, it'll be well landscaped, again, really providing a nice visual for the entries. As part of our application, there's an irrigation line that exists on this property edge here. And that is going to be landscaped as best as we can. It is an irrigation line. We worked with the irrigation district. We have the easement set that they want. They, of course, don't want any trees. And so we planted up closer to those units to provide that. But you will notice that we are deficient of trees in that landscape edge for that reason. It will also provide a buffer to the adjacent neighbors. There was a comment in the staff report about connectivity to the main entrances. What you're seeing here is the architect's version of sidewalks, very straight lines, very linear. Our landscape architect's going to get in here and maybe do some meandering paths and direct connection to those front doors. What does that look like? We don't know yet, but we'll get there. We'll define that as we move forward. I think that's everything building related. I'm going to jump to parking, which we have heard a lot about this evening. I want to make it clear we are parking the units per Garden City's code, and we do have guest parking spaces on site. We are deficient, and we feel that based off of the ULI adjacent jurisdictions, that we are parked guest parking wise enough to meet some of those other standards, that the Garden City standard is a little high as it relates to guest parking. We did put together this map. It's also in our letter where we've got sort of the walking perimeter versus walking biking versus where you get out to more of a biking diameter. The biking's about a mile, walking's a little less than half a mile, and you can start to see we've got transit stops, we've got all sorts of adjacent development, the green belt obviously in the river. So we really feel like there are plenty of amenities within walking distance, as well as pathways and ways to get to our site for those guests in order to counteract the lack of parking as it relates to again, just specifically those guest parking spaces. In the interest of time, I will leave it there, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
based on your comments, it sounds like you've already gone through the staff report and have asked all the questions you might have related to the staff report. We'll turn it over to the committee for any specific input.
Can you click through maybe and we can first talk about the street elevations of the units?
So this is 47th Street right here. And so again, and you are seeing the end of the units, but we did that intentionally to focus on courtyard spaces, landscape spaces. And we do feel like there's adequate landscape adjacent to the sidewalk to really make that feel not like you're walking against the end of a building, but it will be a nice sidewalk up against that edge.
Yeah, I mean.
We're gonna need.
Yeah, courtyard space is great. I love bocce ball. It's gonna be super fun. I'm gonna come poach on the court. But those end units need to address the street. There's no like, but if you have courtyard, then you don't need to address the street. It's just address the street. So, and I think what is missed very often, maybe every time with developments like this, where there's, multiple units and only one faces the street, I think that there's an opportunity to make that unit really cool and really special, and not just let's stick a door on it and have an awkward way to get up to our unit and forget about the street. I think it's an opportunity to make that end unit unique. And so there's your challenge.
I love a good design problem.
This is a very minor comment, but the renderings you have there show chain link. Chain link's not allowed by code. So,
I noticed that. I apologize about that. I think it's existing and we just didn't take it out, but we haven't did fencing yet, so we'll make it code compliant.
And then go ahead, Brett. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I just have a little bit of a concern of the I guess identity of those, the furthest units would be, we'll just call them the far end of the development. And those two buildings are, of course, facing again the adjacent property line, but they don't have the ability to have some kind of visual connectivity to the street like the side units. So the middle units have this courtyard, which serves as a good connection to that street for those units. And then the two flanking ones on either side do have that walking path that can be really strengthened as this pedestrian spine. But boy, those ones in the very end there, their identity is their garages and from internal on the site. And it just, I don't know, just something about that arrangement gives me, it just feels a little uncomfortable. Feels like that's significantly removed, and maybe it would help if instead of having two guest parking spaces there, it was an extension of maybe that internal plaza space that crosses over, that connects those other two units. So it really feels like it's got a stronger connection to the whole. And I know we're talking about, oh, we're already deficient 5 parking stalls. Well, it's always interesting to get a graphic like what's here in our packet that shows, okay, here's the alternative. If we were to get our parking, we'd have to remove all the required common space. And there's other alternatives to gain parking besides removing required open space.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think required open space removal is an option, quite frankly. So,
yeah, I had a note about the terminal views of the actual drives and what those look at where they terminate into these end buildings. So I think that's really important. What we see as we're looking down this long, drive aisle, But so address that, part A, and then part B is what Brett's saying is how do you address it down the central common area? And I really like that. I think there's a great opportunity, as Brett's suggesting, to kind of highlight that kind of center there. And maybe something we've touched on in previous applications is, you know, is there an opportunity that drive aisle and parking becomes multi-use? And so can that common area spine not only continue and accentuate the buildings on the end, but is there then, you know, a multi-use sports court that is part of the parking, which then, you know, engages people with you know, slowing down cars in essence, whatever sport that may be. I could list 4, but maybe play with that.
So, yeah, I think those are the big ones. That I.
And then
that
I had
see.
another sort of big one was lines. I see that, you know, there's the gables that are there to kind of break up the roof line, but I don't think they go far enough. It just seems like it's a token hip that connects to the, you know, main roof line, but, you know, given some distance, we still have this long, you know, entire building long spine. So I'd say accentuate those hips, drop the, you know, have a different fascia line, something to give that more depth of character.
We did initially play with gables on those ends and it just kind of, it was too disjointed, but we'll go back to the drawing board on that roof line.
And then just to touch again on the parking, which you heard a lot of dialogue about. If there is a parking reduction, why is there a parking reduction? You know, what are you doing in this project that warrants less guest parking? Not what code are you pointing to that requires less guest parking? What are you doing specifically that requires less guest parking? I guess that's how I just.
And
reiterate
one
that.
point, sorry, Derek, I didn't mean to run over you there. One point, I did notice that you looked at transit, that line has been removed, so it's no longer there.
And on that note, Jenna, what is, like, I know this development is X units, and throughout the night, we've talked about many more units, and there's hundreds of units on 43rd and Adams. And, you know, what does it take to get that line back? Because we're referencing it often, but is it just a trigger number of people? Is it a, you know, any insight on that?
I would suspect it's a number of things. I think having ridership certainly helps. I think funding, as my understanding, BRT also needs the funding for the line.
And as a note, we've got lots of bike parking, both external to the site as well as covered bike parking, you know, all things that have been mentioned, ride shares, scooters, things of that nature. The interesting comment came up earlier about, providing a dedicated car space. So all things that we can look to help really define what we're specifically doing to address parking.
And it wasn't just a designated car space, it was a designated car.
Correct.
And that's what I think made it exceptional in my mind. Because yeah, we can paint zip car only on the pavement for $30 with some yellow paint, but this was kind of above and beyond.
And piggybacking off of the parking requirements and substituting parking spaces for bicycle and public transit, et cetera. There is the next application actually, is right next to this property to the west. And so the staff report mentions the ability for these two developments to work together to create maybe more of a larger common open space on the adjacent, like the sharing property line, or creating a pedestrian bicycle pathway that could extend through the entire lengths of both of these properties.
I did reach out to the property owner, but it was so close to this meeting after finding out they were about to describe this. I did reach out, but I just haven't heard out, but we are willing, okay, no, yeah, so we are willing to do whatever to make sure the property will work with we want them, and we're going to change whenever we run that out.
That's great.
We just need to do more exploration, because the diagrams that were sent to us, one of them didn't show, we have 2 parcels. So it didn't accurately reflect where the elevation is.
Just for the benefit of the committee members, I don't know if you can hear this since a lot of the discussion is going on outside of a microphone, but this application and the next application, they're having sidebars that they are potentially willing to work together to create that connectivity. And I just wanted to note that it is in line with the recent ULI recommendations too. Although I do have an attorney looking at me, it's not adopted anywhere.
It just wouldn't be a straight alignment, as long as that's clear, like. Because ours is coming down the edge of the property and then over to the others.
So.
Okay.
Probably got myself into trouble, sorry.
Jeff Bauer, 601 West Bannock in Boise, here with the applicant team. I guess what we would say is that when we come before this body for our public hearing, we will have coordinated with the applicant next door and have proposed a plan to provide pedestrian connectivity through the block. We do not foresee it being a straight line, but we will have a plan.
Thank you. All right, any other comments?
I don't.
Nope.
And I guess we're probably out of time.
We do have 4 minutes left.
Yeah. And I'll just say the glass doctor one, and I guess discussions and pre-apps, can continue without me if that's the will of the other committee member. But that glass doctor one, that looked fine. And, I don't know what deeper discussion we need on that, but if Jeff needs to get going on that one, you guys may be able to touch on it and address any high points, and we can push that one forward. Sorry to interject. I just wanted to get one more checkbox checked.
No, I'm also okay with that one.
Okay, along those lines, just very quickly on the number 15 as well. Do the committee members feel that needs more discussion, or would that one be okay as well? It's the State Street reduction in glazing on, I think, 3 units.
And that was the biggest thing about it, right? Was the reduction in glazing.
Thank you. Hannah just reminded me that there's also.
Yeah, so with the State Street townhomes, They are doing facade changes that they're wishing to change, and then the pedestrian pathway along State Street. Jeff has provided 2 alternatives for the committee to decide which would be the best one to move forward with.
Okay. And that one you may need to get deeper into, but I knew the glass doctor one would be quick, and I knew Jeff didn't want to take too much more time on the glass doctor.
All right.
Go ahead, Jeff, and I'll just disappear when I have to.
Commissioner Hurd, I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion. I would propose, in the consideration of time and expediency, I have a range of permits that are on hold until just the sidewalk portion of McCarthy could be discussed. I'm fine not talking about anything else and leaving it all exactly the same, but if we can get through that tonight, a glass doctor is probably a lower priority versus having to get that, at least your feedback on that.
Can we do it in 1 minute?
Yeah, can you show me the 2 options right now?
Okay.
Explain.
All right, here we go. Boom. So we have this letter from John Patton that says we absolutely cannot, which was in the thing, put any trees or shrubs or anything where we want the
next slide
sidewalk to go. So the two options we have is keeping the 10-foot multimodal, shifting the trees back up against the buildings, or we could reduce the multimodal to 6 feet, add some nice shrubs, and keep the trees in the same location. Quantity trees didn't change. Species we're working with, Hanna. It's just, do either of these solutions work?
Yeah. Many people.
Is multimodal like a set standard at,
It is for
at
this
10
stretch.
feet?
We're tying into a 5 foot, and on the other side, there's no sidewalk.
So you have 5 foot one way and 0 the other, and you're proposing 6 with landscaping buffer, which feels to me more.
The intent to soften, yes.
I would concur with that.
You got 55 miles an hour. So.
6
I
foot?
would, yep, 6 foot.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Is that Laurel?
Let's do all applications.
All right.
Speed review.
All right.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, and we'll adjourn at 6:30.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Guys, good night.